Okay, let me just make sure we are good on YouTube.
Yeah, if you could paste the link for that, either in YouTube or Discord, that would be great.
Definitely. Okay, so here is, there we go. And I'm gonna close out your broadcast to save bandwidth for me and
Okay.
mine as well. So we are good to go. Okay, everyone, Addy Ads here. Anakin Skywalker, YouTube's chosen one. I got a really special guest today. I'm really fortunate to be here with Mr. Kevin W. McCairn, PhD. I found Mr. McCairn via Kev Baker's show, and I can put the link to the description to Kev Baker's show in the box below. But I am really interested in what Mr. McCairn has to say. And before we get into, I guess, the weeds a little bit, could you just give people your qualifications so people know that we're not talking to some random Yahoo on the internet?
um, I do have a Yahoo account. It's my main email. But yeah, my name's Dr. Kevin McCairn. I'm a neuroscientist. I've been working professionally for 20 years. And my speciality is the corticobasal ganglia system in the central nervous system. And this region, when it goes wrong, generally you tend to see it in old people and they get Parkinson's and they can't move. They become bradykinetic and akinetic, which means inability to move and slowness of movement. But on the other extreme to that, which is more my area of interest, I spend a lot more time studying it, is Tourette's and neuropsychiatric disorders like obsessive compulsive disorders. And can you hear notifications coming through? That's my Discord. Maybe if I can just close that, because that's actually kind of irritating. So my sorry about that. So my speciality is to understand the circuits involved with Touretteism and also neuropsychiatric disorders like obsessive compulsive behavior, hyperkinetic disorders, and basically what you could call impulse disorders on generally kids. Tourette's is a childhood disorder, usually resolves, but in some cases it doesn't. It progresses to a point where it becomes a danger to the person. It's a lot of burden for the families. So I've spent a lot of time working on brain implantation technologies, specifically deep brain stimulation, as a way to sort of mediate or to mitigate, the symptoms of the disorder. But the reason we're talking is that traits that come with those conditions that become very easily recognizable when you work with them clinically or in a research environment. So just to give you an analogy, so something like Parkinson's disease, you can spot someone who's Parkinson's, right? Because they'll have like a sort of tremor, and you can sort of notice those behaviors. And it's the same with the other end, where you have these what we call Touretteisms. And so if anyone knows someone with Tourette's, you know that they can be prone to.
You cut out. Okay.
It's okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
And if you're dealing with Tourette's, there are behaviors that are common in the clinical profile. So Tourette's patients have a wide spectrum of disorders, of symptoms, and they can be very idiosyncratic to the person. So, but there are sort of general types that we can sort of classify. And so the classic one for Tourette's, where it's really famous, is one called Coprolalia. And what that is they will swear or do something really inappropriate. So, and that's why it's really famous. So you'll be talking to them and they'll drop an F-bomb sort of out the middle of nowhere. And as well as sort of the swearing, spitting is a common symptom that you see. And so part of my work and research is to try to understand what are the neural mechanisms for those behaviors.
Okay.
And
If you mentioned it already, forgive me because I was having trouble hearing you, but I can hear you perfectly now. You studied, it sounds like you're from England. And did you study there
yeah.
in England?
So I got my bachelor's at Edinburgh University, and then I started my PhD at the in Paris at the called the Hôpital Salpêtrière, which was the home of Gilles de la Tourette. He's the clinician in the late 1800s who first defined Tourette's as a disorder, as a unique clinical disorder. And so I started work there where they were modeling the condition with primates, and I sort of got into it there. And because it's a difficult field, you require very specialized facilities in order to be able to do these experiments. And the support in the West has dropped drastically for within sort of university infrastructures and research infrastructure where you could sort of do the experiments that I was doing. And so basically I've had to come east where there's a more sort of open view on on what to do and how to use these test platforms.
And why? So you're in Japan now. When you mean the East, why is that's kind of not easier to do in the West?
Because the institutes don't want to support it because there's a lot of pressure from the people who, of a better word, you can sort of class in the SJW realm, where they want to sort of police everything, and the animal rights activists cause a big problem for universities. And so I see you're sort of frozen right now, so I'm not sure if you're hearing me.
Oh, I can hear you just fine.
Did you hear what I was saying?
So you said that basically animal rights activists make it really hard to do some of this research for you in the.
Yeah. It's impossible, basically, in any sort of public institution like university. Perhaps in some sort of private setting, people might be doing it, but I'm very current with the literature, and I don't see people doing what I'm doing. And so, to sort of emphasize for your listeners, as we've sort of gone around the houses with respect to the difficulties with the research and why I'm doing Tourette's. The reason that we're speaking right now is because as the pandemic began to emerge in China, there were very specific behaviors that I was seeing from people that were indicative to me of pathologies within the central nervous system. It wasn't just a viral pneumonia. So that's what people are sort of thinking of the COVID outbreak right now. Is just it's a
just the flu, right? That's
what well, just the flu, bro, and it's just something that's gonna impact your breathing. And most young people, because I know you want to sort of speak to the young, they sort of youth is wasted on the young, they say, and you're all nice and fit and right, and I miss those times as well. And you think you're just going to get over it like any other sort of bad flu.
Yeah,
but I think
invincible.
Look, I had that problem too when I was young. Get a few beers in me as well. I was terrible. But you sort of get older and your body starts falling apart, and with decay comes wisdom, I would say. And
definitely, and it seems to me in the United States here that especially the young people, but even I don't know, just a lot of people aren't taking it seriously, and like young people are thinking that it's almost cool not to take it seriously. And there's also the problem, I think, too, that Americans have in general with stuff that doesn't go on in this country is just kind of ignore it, and it's like, it doesn't affect me. or it makes them uncomfortable, so they just think about something else. And the
Yeah.
reason that I am trying to, I guess, broadcasting and learn more about this and get people to understand this is because I'm seeing people in my life and around me who I don't know as well, like behave in ways that I really haven't seen them behave before, and I know it's because of fear.
Of fear. Yeah, I mean, that is a big factor. And the United States is a unique case. I lived there for many years, and I can understand those that are steeped in the American idea and that the freedoms of the Constitution, etc. That any sort of encroachment by government into the lives of people, where they would say, hang on, there is something that you need to be paying attention to, can you need to sort of shut yourselves down, right? So that's a very bitter pill for people in the United States to sort of deal with anyway, because they feel it is government encroaching into their private lives. But the fact that people are missing right now, and even the people that we've charged with the responsibility to make sure that things like this pandemic are taken care of, I've argued very much from the beginning, have been in dereliction of their duty. So specifically the World Health Organization, when they went to China and they delayed calling a pandemic, and they changed the definition of a pandemic.
How did they change the definition?
So that's a good question, and we should probably, you would have to sort of get into the weeds with respect to the exact definition. But basically, it just boiled down to them saying we're not actually prepared for a pandemic. This is the interpretation that you can take. We're not prepared for an actual pandemic. And so we need to change the definitions before we kick in the mechanisms that we have that are supposed to be there to protect people. And another little dirty card that was sort of hidden in this mix was the fact that the World Health Organization, in conjunction with the World Bank, basically had a $500 million bond that was supposed to mature in, I want to say June, but it might be June or July, that if there was no pandemic recorded globally and the World Health Organization didn't have to go through this process, that they stood to receive $500 million through the maturity of this bond that they had. And so there's been a lot of sort of sketchy behavior from these officials, and it's not just the World Health Organization, it's gone to officials in the United States, and I will publicly call out the Surgeon General.
Oh my God, dude. Oh my God. I can't believe this guy. Like, how did this guy get this job? And like, I don't understand. Like, these people think we're stupid. Like it just, and like during college, like I really didn't, I just kind of kept my political opinions to myself as a matter of almost my personality and it not interesting me. But when like my livelihood or my family's livelihoods are on the line, like I'm going to say what I think is the truth, regardless of how people feel about it. And I really think that people should live that way regardless. But I don't understand how people aren't really outraged at this, or at least like questioning, like, why is this guy? And I read too, I haven't verified this, but I read that Macron is doing this, and other leaders are saying that masks don't work. Masks do almost to nothing or nothing. Which
That's
is
lies.
Is that, wait, say it again, Kevin?
That's lies. They're lying to you. Okay,
yeah,
so yeah. The reason that I sort of, I forced myself off my couch to actually do something is that I was watching these people, even in the context of scientific papers that were coming out at the time, and like people can go to my channel and they can sort of see videos that I've done that specifically address this. But they were, and this is the thing that was highly disturbing to me. So General Adams stood there with Fauci, is it Anthony Fauci, on the stage, and some other sort of greasy pole climbers, stood there in front of the American people and basically the Western world, because the people looked to the United States as sort of being a touchstone of what to do, said, masks are not going to help you. Okay, you just need to be concentrating on washing your hands and engaging in sort of clean practices, clean living. Now, the disgusting thing was that whilst those words were coming out of his mouth, the United States military, the CDC, and all those other organizations that again there to protect you were requisitioning every bit of PPE that they could get their hands on, including masks, right? And there's very good evidence, you know, and we can get into the figures about from Japan a little bit later on, but countries where masks are more common, the spread has been lower, okay? And anything that that can lower the infective load coming into the nervous system is going to help your body in the long run, right? It gives your immune system time to sort of respond to it. So it's like a sort of inoculum that you would get as part of sort of a vaccine type.
This virus is spread via respiratory droplets, right? So these can be expired via coughing or just breathing too, right?
Yeah. So, well, the thing with the virus to take into account is its target receptor, the angiotensin converting enzyme receptor. It's widespread throughout the body. Pretty much every major system in the body uses these receptors, and it's on sort of like smooth muscle, and it helps sort of control flow. So like it's in the genitourinary tract, it's in the lungs, and it's there to sort of help with dilation of the smooth muscle. It's in the brain, and it's
to interrupt you one sec, hold that thought, but got a couple people said you are a little glitchy because your bandwidth. I think it might be because you're running both streams. Is there any way people could migrate here and then go back to your channel, or?
I mean, they can come out. I'm using a different computer, so it shouldn't be affecting.
Okay. Well, if it bothers the viewers, Horatius and Wizardry, whoever, just let us know. Anyways, continue.
Oh, can I see comments? I see live comments. Can I press that?
Yeah. I think I
okay. Yeah, I've got it. So if it gets glitchy, it might just be that the signal's a bit weak. My extender broke the other week. I don't know why. I think it just needs a reset. So I might just change room.
I think people are going to be just fine.
Okay. So Horatio says that, you know, I call him the baby face, the Jerome Adams individual, and like I say, I think that there has to be some degree of professional culpability when someone's standing up, and it's his duty to know the scientific literature of the time, especially when dealing with these complex situations. And if he's going to sort of hide behind that, well, they didn't know, that's incompetence on my part, in my opinion.
Incompetence on a mass murder scale.
Yeah, I mean, people right now are being infected, and then people are dying because they didn't take the time to say any mask is better than nothing. And so if you look through a lot of my videos, and I actually wrap one of my masks around my microphone to sort of act as a sort of wind filter. But, you know, I was saying, look, I've got a cycle mask, right? Anything that you can get a t-shirt, cut the t-shirt up and wrap it around your face, right? Doesn't matter what it is.
I went to the grocery store a couple days ago because I had to, and I just you know, there's no mask to be found, so I just I got a towel and wrapped it around my face.
Yeah. And you know, you'll get some smart aleck going, well, you know, that's not going to stop viral particles getting in, etc. But what it does do is it stops you sort of touching your face where you've touched surfaces, and it is, you know, it's just an extra hurdle for those droplets to get over rather than just sort of exposing yourself.
Yeah, and
Now,
that's sort of like thinking like that too. That mindset is like, well, you might as well just infect yourself on purpose, like right away, anyways. If you're not even trying to
yeah.
like prevent it, like.
Yeah. So here's what's happening with respect to the sort of public health aspect. So many countries, and they're right in a sense that you have to achieve some sort of herd immunity, right? So you have to sort of let the virus get into the population. We know it exists now. Whatever we think about the providence of this agent, where who's responsible, that's not the thing to be arguing about right now.
It's a very interesting question. It is, and I
mm.
think it will be investigated honestly forever. But right now, it does not matter.
Yeah, and but at the moment, while dealing with these with this pandemic, that's, well, I would just say it's literally sort of grabbed the planet by the scruff of the neck, and a lot of people are in shock and literally don't know what to do. And so there you sort of fall into the realm of it's just the flu, bro.
Mm-hmm.
Or there was footage coming out because it was spring break in the US, and there's kids there that are they're not protecting themselves. They want to party, and yeah, I mean, for want of a better word, the only thing I would say is that I've been young and done stupid stuff, and you can't. There has to be a learning curve with people, but and so if these people are making mistakes, you can't just sort of come down on them. It's not Saudi Arabia, right? And you can't just go beating them.
Yeah, that's the great thing. And I went on a bit of a, not a rant, but just I was talking to my Snapchat about that, and it's like a double-edged sword of liberty, right? Whereas like in the East, where in other countries where they do have these regimes, essentially totalitarian, more or less,
they're totalitarian.
Yeah, I mean, they can clamp down on this thing really easily, whereas like in the West, like because people have liberty, which is great, it's way harder to get everybody on the same page.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what's happening right now. And I see sort of people talking and getting into debates about what's the right posture to take under these circumstances. And the argument for is it worth the price of crashing the economy and putting millions of people out of work, as we're doing sort of right now? Well, what I would say to that is if the steps had been taken weeks to months earlier, where the pandemic should have been called when it was. So in January, as soon as we knew that there was some problem going on that was not well understood, okay. And I can tell you this, the reason that it caught my attention is that there's specific protocols. If you work in those environments, I work around those kind of vectors, rabies, adenovirus, that's part of the working environment. You have to know the rules with respect to what happens if you think there's a breach. And basically the rulings go like this: always assume that you are contaminated when you're coming out of the facility. You strip off properly, you disinfect properly as you're coming out, and you have to go through this whole just to get out of the lab like you have to get into it. Okay, now let's just presume that the Chinese authorities were the first ones, wherever it came from. Okay, so it's another question, but they started to see that there was something wrong, and there was a suspicion that it could have come from a BSL-4 facility. As soon as they understood that, then the mechanism should have kicked in weeks before we were seeing them on TV, right?
And could you explain to the viewers what PSL-4 facility is?
So basically, BSL-1 would be a sort of standard laboratory where there's bioagents and non-infectious agents would be being dealt with. P2 would be something like, in a P2 lab, you can use something like rabies as an investigative tool. We used it in neuroscience as a way to track neural networks that we're interested in, because it has this property of infecting the cell and then traveling along an axon and then sending out viral particles onto the cell that it synapses to. And that gives, it's like taking a sort of nice picture of a three-dimensional network when you use these tracers. It's very elegant technology when used correctly. So in a P2 lab, you could use rabies, but you can only use it for experiment, right? You can't do experiments on the vector itself, right? So if you want to manipulate the rabies, I'll stick with rabies because one, it's an extreme example, and it's something people can sort of understand that there's a serious component. So in the P3 laboratory, you can start doing manipulations on those agents where you're trying to make them more, you're trying to tune them so they're better as scientific tools for neuroscience, for example, or they want to sort of understand the natural mechanisms of the disease itself, right? So in a P3 laboratory, my understanding is you would be able to sort of infect test animals with the natural agent, just to sort of get an understanding, or you could culture antibodies and stuff to specific toxins as a way to sort of do these. I mean, there's an infinite number of things that you can do in these facilities if you wanted to, but that's the sort of general scope of them. Once you get to a BS,
what's the difference between 3 and 4 then? What's the difference between those two?
So once you get to 4, you're basically talking what would be considered a gain of function type of research.
Oh, wow.
So that would be essentially weapons, weapons-based facilities, and there's a question of, well, is the COVID strain that's out right now, is that a weaponized mutated form, right? And again, that sort of falls into, well, it's very difficult to tell because it might have been
nature.
It might have been tuned within the lab using natural processes to sort of get to it, or there's maybe there's sort of engineering at levels that I'm not really familiar with that can sort of get these foreign genes into the genome of the virus, prove its infectivity. So
you there, Kev? You cut out.
Can you hear me?
Oh yeah, now I can.
Yeah, I think you've lost me.
Oh, I can hear you.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So something like gain of function is where you're really getting down into the nuts and bolts of the virus itself, and you're saying, okay, we can see this particular amino acid sequence. What happens if we swap that out with something from I don't know, think of a bad virus and just see if you can modify the strain to give it different properties. And so these strains,
so interesting. It's essentially, when you think of like an arms dealer trying to modify a weapon or a rifle or an assault rifle, that's what they're doing at a viral and molecular level.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And all these sort of weapon labs are. I'll give an example of anthrax. Right. So anthrax is a disease. I mean, it's naturally occurring in the environment, and generally, it's not a problem because the distribution of it is generally low, so you're not exposed to a toxic amount. Now, what they found was when they did so anthrax is a biological weapon that they can use, and what they found but they do these investigations in these laboratories. So they have to sort of, it's almost like milling the culture. So you concentrate the culture and you have to get it down into a very fine form. So if it becomes aerosolized, it's not sort of you're exposing, like, it might look very fine mist, but because there's so many sort of individual particles that are making up that mist, it becomes much more infective because you're getting more of the agent into your body. Okay, and so all those types of things that would be done in a BSL-4 laboratory, and the to people who just I can see the chat. So there were reports coming out. So there was one paper that came out from India that said that there looks like parts of the genome that come from HIV. That paper got jumped on really quick. And the only reason I'll tell you the reason why is because it came out of India, right? And there are organizations and universities in the West where the competition is very high. And then a few weeks later, after they made the Indians withdraw their paper, a similar paper came out into the literature saying, well, yeah, there does look like there is HIV elements in this paper. So again, there's a disruption in the information flow from these officials, from the scientific domain into the public domain. And at the end of the day, 95% of all that infrastructure is public owned, because it's the public's taxes which are providing the funding for the infrastructure with respect to universities, with respect to universities can't operate without proper infrastructure around them. So, the sort of industrial type research, the public have a right to know everything that's going on in these places. And you can probably make the argument that something like the Wuhan Virology Lab, or something like Fort Detrick or Porton Down in the UK, you could say, well, if there's weapons components to it, you want to be, obviously you want some degree of security, so your enemies don't know what exactly it is that you're working on.
Right.
But it's not very hard though to go to public records and see the agents that these universities are carrying and look at their publications. So the Wuhan facility were publishing work on SARS variants 2011, 2014. I know there's papers. There's a bunch of stuff that's coming out, and that Chinese institute wasn't working on its own. Okay, it was collaborating with Western universities. So there were people from Winnipeg in Canada, Duke University were involved. There was people from Harvard involved, and the professor there got arrested because he had he was basically taking money from the Chinese, was in a faculty position at Harvard, and was, well, what are these people?
What was he being paid to do, Kevin, by the Chinese?
So it was sort of set up stuff with respect to nanotechnology, and he was closely involved with the virology lab in Wuhan. And you can look online and go to the arrest record, but he literally got pulled in January because of his ties. And like I say, when people want to get into who did it, right? Who's responsible? There's so many dirty fingerprints on it that I think it's going to be virtually impossible to tell who was responsible, right? And already what you're seeing is you're seeing Donald Trump turn around and say, well, it's Chinese virus, and what's his name, Peter Navarro, so who's part of the Trump team. He's very much a advocate of cutting off the or disrupting China's ability to disrupt Western manufacture. So that the West has put so much, has offshored so much of their industrial capacity to the West. And this guy, let me just pull up a link for you.
To the East, you mean, right?
Sorry. Yeah, it's gone to China, in the East. But you need to know about this man, and he wrote a book called Death by China. Death by China, and he's on the Trump team, and literally saw him. I think it was the same guy a couple of days ago, basically saying, if you're hoarding masks, hand sanitizer, we're basically coming to get you, right? I think that was Peter Navarro, and basically his premise, and he's got the ear of the president, is that we're basically going into a war footing because these people control the ability to manufacture. And this, you could argue that this is all part of the trade war that's going on between the US and
by these
China.
people, you mean the Chinese?
Yeah, Chinese, but also there are elements within the Trump administration who are looking at, who want to bring back manufacturing from China back to the US.
Oh,
And
wow. Okay, I'm connecting the dots now, Kevin. So I've been doing a hella reading on Twitter because honestly, in my opinion, other than YouTube, it's the best place to look for news on this. Google is hiding shit, in my opinion, as they have been.
yeah.
But I lost my train of thought. What did you just say?
So you were saying that you were sort of connecting dots with respect to the, you could say the
Trade war. Yeah.
Of
So I saw people hypothesizing that this is going to, by necessity, force trade routes and force more localization, right, as opposed to globalization, which, as you said, ties into getting those jobs back into the U.S. Which, yeah, I can see that argument.
So that's going on right now, and I would I don't know if I can sort of post links here, but I will give you,
if you send it to me, I can share it.
Okay. So
you might be able to if it says share screen, but I think only the host can. So if you send me the link, I can definitely.
Okay. Well, I'll just send you the book that he wrote, and this gentleman is a he's not fully, well, you're American, you're going to find out the details more than me, but this gentleman who wrote the book Death by China, he's an integral part of Trump's strategic planning in this trade war. So you should have the,
is this Peter Navarro and Greg?
Yeah. So Peter Navarro, and I want to say I saw someone called Navarro, and I just called it the end of sorry, my mouse just seems to have packed in.
Yeah, this is the book that Kevin's talking about.
Yeah, so Peter Navarro has the ear, and they are engaging in, well, it's not a hot war right now, but you can say it's semi-warm, and you know, people like ourselves who are just the public are just trying to sort of piece together the bits of information that do come out, and we are well, like I said earlier, where if someone like the Surgeon General, whose job, his remit is to protect the American public, is standing up in front of the media and saying masks are no good, right? If they can do that lie, which has immediate impact on people's health and safety, people like Peter Navarro, who's look, and if you asked me, is it good that China has all this industrial capacity and the inside track to a lot of technology that's developed in the West? I think it's a terrible idea. Just for example, because pretty much 90% of all the pharmaceuticals that you use are produced in China, right? Wow, so
I did not know that.
Yeah, there's literally no strategic reserve. So when they were trying to requisition masks for the US, they literally, like, they took a stock and basically they said they had enough for about 2.5-3 days, right? And now they're trying to sort of ramp up mass production locally. And I've got a good friend, I don't know if we could get him on, but he speaks very eloquently to this, and maybe we can sort of set up another stream another time, as this was sort of
for sure, man. We can do a three-way for sure.
Yeah, and he has a much better insight into into these intricacies that I don't as an outsider. What I can speak to is the disease aspect itself, and I'm not a virologist, so a lot of people are going to be saying, Dr. McCairn, why are you speaking about this when you're not a virologist? Well, the virologist got as far as understanding that the COVID agent is what they call an opportunistic neurotrophic agent, right? So a neurotrophic agent is one that is able to penetrate the blood and once past the initiate its replication cycle such that it can propagate through the brain. And the classic example is rabies. That's what we use as a sort of model system. And
that's a great example, because people, I would say almost everybody knows what that is and what that entails.
Yeah, so think of a worst case scenario of a rabid dog or raccoon or something along those lines. And when those animals get infected, what do? They become aggressive and try to bite. And what does the bite do? It spreads
Yeah, it's like zombies, exactly, right?
Yeah, right. So which is why I sort of tongue in cheek sort of put stuff on my channel which is talking about COVID zombies, because the thing that struck out to me was this, especially on these videos, was all these spitting and deliberate contamination footage that you were seeing, and it hasn't stopped in China. And
I saw that video you posted of that. Then I think it was a nurse, and she got spit on in the face.
Yeah. I mean, that was just me sort of
at the hospital though, and like I think
yeah,
people might say like, well, yeah, there's gonna be one or two crazies that are like the guy in, I think he was in Missouri. He got he was like licking stuff in Walmart, and he got arrested for terrorism. Now, we don't know if he may have it or not. He may just be doing that for clout or attention or grifting or whatever. But why would someone who's already in the hospital, who has been diagnosed, spit on a nurse's face is, I think, a good question, right?
Yeah. So this is where we have to pull it back to the idea of something like Touretteism, which is an involuntary. You can think of it as like a sort of initiation of a reflex. So the example I was giving, Kev, is when they test the reflex of your knee, they'll sort of stretch the knee a little bit and they'll tap it, and the knee moves involuntarily, right? So it's not imagine. So the nervous system is built in this sort of hierarchical fashion, where they're very, very basic pattern generators within the spinal cord. So like stepping, etc. And as you climb up the spinal cord, the reflexes get more and more complex as you head into the brain stem, and then you get into the midbrain, which is this area called the basal ganglia, which is the area that I sort of focus on. And that region, basically, you can pass it down to 3 different functional territories. The one is sensory motor, one is the executive function, so the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, and the other is the limbic region. Now, sensory motor is obvious. That's what sort of controls your movement and what's enabling you to sort of move around and type and do what you're doing right now. Okay. The executive and the limbic structures are not understood as well. And that's been my job to sort of tease apart what those networks are doing. And what my research has shown is that once you disinhibit those limbic networks, particularly the nucleus accumbens in my case, what you see is you start to see involuntary behaviors that look like the Touretteisms that you see in people. And so one of the things that you see is like grunting and vocalization in the animal, and they will begin to salivate heavily, and it's a very sort of thick saliva that they produce,
like foaming.
Yeah, foaming. And a monkey doesn't really spit. A monkey acts a bit like a dog. When it sort of gets to it, it'll do like head shakes to sort of get rid of water. But if you sort of step up the evolutionary tree and you get to something like a chimpanzee can launch a spitball at you from sort of 3-4 meters away, and yeah, and they're pretty accurate, right? And yeah, you have to pay attention. And these so if a chimpanzee has that spit reflex, right, human beings do as well, and we know they have them because you can look in the clinical literature, and spitting is one of the profiles that they talk about when they're trying to define Touretteism, and you can sort of look online and you'll see examples of people doing that.
Yeah, it's a very, very primal kind of response, isn't it? Or thing?
Yeah. And there's so the question then becomes, well, how can we haven't evolved out of it, right? It would be that, that's what people want to ask, or if they have sort of philosophical objections to evolution, they might say, well, why is that there? And my answer would be, well, I do think there's a phylogeny that we can trace through the fossil record that sort of indicates that there is an advancement from pre-vertebrates to vertebrates, and as the vertebrates became more complex, eventually they embed more and more reflexes, and then once you get from an animal that's so a rodent is essentially a two-dimensional animal. It doesn't operate on a third, but if you sort of step up to like a primate, the nervous system goes through this sort of expansion, and so in a rodent, the nervous system is essentially just like a long cord. Same with fish. Fish is a vertebrate, and there's not much difference between a fish and a rat, right? If you sort of look at the brain structure and just the spinal cord and the brain structure. I mean, the sizes will vary depending on the environment in which they live. But as you step up the evolutionary tree, what happens is, as sort of bipedalism comes into the apes, the brain essentially folds over itself, right? And it goes through this very, very complex set of projections. This happens in rodents too. So like the left side of your brain is responsible for your right side and vice versa in terms of muscular control. I've never really heard a good satisfactory answer as to why that should be, but that's how the brain is. And that's as best as I can sort of answer that. But this folding and this increase in complexity has embedded in it a lot of these sort of reflexes, these primal reflexes that you were sort of talking about. And a lot of the energy that your brain uses, right? So the brain is very active, and it uses a huge proportion of the glucose and blood flow, even when resting. And actually what that's doing is keeping your brain quiet. It's not sort of engaged in, people sort of think, oh, all the blood and oxygen's going there because the brain needs to do so many different functions. Actually, what it's doing, if you look at the areas of the brain with the highest metabolism, so that's an area called the globus pallidus in the basal ganglia, but also the cerebellum. And I'm happy to sort of go through, because this is sort of a bit off the cuff. We can do a more sort of detailed interview where I'll go through the neuroanatomy and try to sort of help.
This is really interesting stuff for sure. But yeah, continue with what you're saying right now.
So all that energy is being spent suppressing activity in areas of the brain that would produce action, right? And so Tourette is
like that would be, if I remember, the sympathetic nervous system, right?
No, so within the central nervous system, that division isn't what you're talking about. It's the peripheral nervous system. So the sympathetic branch is the excitatory branch, and then you have the vagal branch, which is the parasympathetic, and they have sort of complex interactions with respect to
it's voluntary, right? And the other isn't.
So the parasympathetic and sympathetic branches are both involuntary, right? They're there for essentially homeostasis. The voluntary stuff is essentially coming from the higher order centers in the brain, okay? And part of what the brain does is it has to make choice all the time. So there's two evolutionarily key adaptations that the nervous system has to do. One is be aware of salient objects in your environment, whether it be food or threat, right? So a lot of your neural capacity is just done to scan the environment, listening, and just to see if you can get a hold of, or if there's something in the environment you need to pay attention to, Okay, and in order for you to do that, to make it to pay attention to, it comes down to this element of choice, right? You have to choose to do something. So like when you were trying to contact me, you have to sort of engage your systems to reach out and do behaviors to get us to this point, so we're having a conversation. And that's basically what the sort of basal ganglia and the cortex is doing. It's sequencing, it's allowing choice and sequencing behaviors so you do something in a coherent manner. So reaching for a cup, right? I reach for my cup, I want to go directly to my cup. I don't want to go around all other possible vectors and directions. You want to go straight to it. And that's what these systems in the brain are doing. So it's suppressing unwanted movements and allowing guided choice-made movements, or even so we'll leave there rather than sort of getting too much into complexity.
So these types of viruses like rabies and COVID, it hijacks the system.
Yeah, so I think there's two potential weak spots that the virus is going to attack. So if the infection gets into the lungs and it begins replicating in the lungs, it has the potential to transfect the phrenic nerves, travel up the spinal cord. So it's called a retrograde transmission. So if you sort of think about a nerve ending, it sort of sends an axon, and there's a synapse which sort of goes onto the target. So think of going onto a muscle, basically, and that synapse will release neurotransmitter to affect the muscle to do contraction. So that virus is able to jump into the synapse itself and enter the cell that way, and then within the cell there's like a sort of filamentary scaffolding made of actin and myosin, and that actin and myosin is it's the intracellular structure that sort of holds the shape of the cell, right? And the virus can basically latch onto that and then crawl its way up to where the nucleus has its cell body, or the cell has its nucleus, the cell body, and inside the nucleus of the cell is where all the machinery is for protein synthesis. So usually what happens in the cell is you've got your DNA wrapped up in the nucleus, and depending on what's needed in the environment, the cell can sort of say, okay, we need this set of genes activating. The DNA exposes itself in a fashion. It's sort of replicated by I want to say it's RNA in the cell. So this you're catching me out here trying to remember the sort of basic.
I do have a question though. Is there any evidence so far that suggests that different demographics are affected differently by this virus, or do we not have that information yet?
So I heard that sort of coming out at the beginning, but I would say right now that it doesn't seem to have a demographic specific component. Maybe, well, in terms of what you would consider race with respect to haplogroup distributions, but it does seem to affect men more than women. And what could be the reason for that? Well, smoking. Yeah, so smoking activates more of the in the lungs. So basically, you're giving it more targets, and more men smoke than women. I would say generally, and that's about the only demographic I've seen where I can say the data looks consistent with there being.
And when people say like, well, it's only old people that die, I mean, obviously it's not true, but also, I mean, old people die more often of everything in terms of illness.
No.
You there, Kev?
I missed the question, Addy. You were breaking up.
Can you hear me okay now?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. I can hear you. Can you hear me okay?
Just about. You know what I might do? I might just change location just to try and get. Is that okay? Just give me 2 minutes.
You want to do a 5-minute? Okay, for sure. Let's. Yeah. I'll.
You understand what I said?
Yep.
I don't know if you can hear me. Addy, I'm just going to change location. I'm just going to change location. Yeah, and see if we get a better reception. So just bear with me.
No problem.
And I'll just fill my tea.
Okay, for sure. Let's do a quick break and then we'll reconvene in 5. How's that? I'm gonna put something on in the meantime. Okay, shares. All right, we'll be back in about 5 minutes. People, don't go anywhere. I'm gonna put something on in the meantime. Give me 2 minutes, guys.
Horatius, if you can hear this, is there any way you can sort of pull up data with respect to demographics where you are for the young? I noticed you. I remember you saying that there was quite a few young people being infected. If we could see a link, I would be interested. Babyface was singing to Trump ears for the racer. You know, that man, the Surgeon General, to me, what I just see is essentially a diversity hire, and someone he's there just to act like a puppet, essentially, and his I don't think he's doing the job that we think he's supposed to be doing, and he doesn't have the demeanor of a general. So yeah, so Horatius is saying Italy, Spain, UK all reporting deaths in the 10 to 20-year-old groups, right? And this is what I'm hearing, and this is where young people, and especially what Addy is talking about, is that they're losing not losing it, they're just not paying attention because they think it's a it's an illness of the old, and I think that's not the case. Yesterday when I was presenting I was showing the video from Italy, and those weren't old people in the ICU. And already, there was a clip of a Spanish doctor. And actually, I wanted to ask Horatius, what do you think?
Alrighty.
What did you think to that? So we're actually. I was talking to Horatius in the chat, yes. And he's a really good individual to sort of have on our side, because he's got a inside track on the statistics within the EU. He literally works with those statistics, so we can get it straight from the horse's mouth.
Awesome. Yeah, let's get him in here. Horatius.
Horatius is he's a bit sort of wary of putting his voice on in public. He's happy. Okay. He's happy to type, and you can ask questions to him.
Okay. And have you verified that he is actually who he says he is?
Yeah, he's the real deal.
Okay. So we have Horatius. Watching. What was he saying? So
So actually,
Babyface was singing to Trump's ears from the very start. He's referring to the Surgeon General. But yeah, whatever you
yeah.
want to like give Horatius that would be helpful info.
Yeah, so he's saying down below that both Italy, Spain, UK are all reporting deaths in the 10 to 20-year-old range. Right. Yesterday in the US, I think it was a 17-year-old died in LA. I
A
want to
male or
say
a
it was.
female? Do you know?
I think it was. I think he was male, and I don't know the status of any underlying health conditions. And Horatius is saying he's seeing he's seeing weirdness in the stats coming out of Italy, and I would say that's unsurprising because what's going to happen is I think Italy was very open in their statistics as the pathogen hit, and what's happened is they've been so open that I bet right now Italians are just panicking, right? And the job of these institutes are to are basically to maintain civil order.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's what you're seeing beginning to take place right now, and I just want to sort of. I think people are having problems in the chat. So
Oh, you guys
wizardry.
okay? Same as me. No video, just text. It's about. No, I think they're okay. He was talking about Horatius. So Horatius is not coming on, guys. But he will be communicating to us via text, as Kevin just said.
Yeah. So I would just say he's such a valuable individual to have around that whatever he needs, we will give it to him just so we can keep getting the information from him. But I can attest to the veracity of everything he says. And
yeah, and I was just in Italy. I left Italy so it got to, I think it was Lenar's airport in Milan on the 30th, and I left.
Oh, you're doomed. You're doomed, dude. That's it. You're done.
Yeah, I mean, I left on the 28th, so I just got out in time, and I actually didn't go through that airport on the way out, only on the way in. So I flew back to the States via Barcelona. But yeah, if I would have left like a month later, I would have been trapped there for sure.
Yeah, and this is what's happening right now, especially as you mentioned at the beginning, is that people in the West have just become complacent almost to the lifestyles that they're leading.
Oh
okay?
My goodness. Yeah, I was talking about this, but you go ahead.
So what people don't understand is that medical martial law is almost worse than what you'd consider like general martial law, where the authority is just trying to maintain control with respect to I don't know what would be an American example, like LA riots or something where there's sort of riots sort of going on, and they have to, civil unrest. That's a good way of putting it. So where there's sort of civil unrest and they sort of instigate a control order and say it's a bad one, that they have to have the military in to maintain, and that would be a sort of martial law scenario. What happens under a medical martial law is that you're basically all your rights get suspended, right? Because of the imposition of the risk from biological agents, right? So your right to free assembly and your right to go and speak and protest or whatever, that's gone, right? And they will not let you have it, or you won't have it all the time that they can use the idea of a pathogen being able to cause some sort of problem. And now I understand that that's an issue to people who are constitutionalists, and they want to think of them when they want to be sovereign citizens. And I'm all for those people, and I do think the government needs being held in check. But what we're looking at right now is unprecedented. Okay, it dwarfs 9/11.
Oh yeah, this is ridiculous, and I people just don't get it. Like, this is like literally at wartime, and it's especially in the United States. And I mentioned this yesterday. I thought this is where you were going, but people are not used to what we've never been invaded. We've never lost a war. We've never even been losing in a war, except minus Vietnam. Vietnam was the biggest, a big L, of course. But I'm talking about wars of necessity. We've never lost. We've never, and Revolutionary War doesn't count because we weren't a nation then. And so people don't understand being on the back foot of something like this.
Yeah, and that's what you are. And I would just look at that map you're looking at right now.
Yeah,
okay,
it's crazy. It's nuts. I mean, I think, and I don't know if you saw this, but Mexico had just entered the country, and I could see it ravaging Mexico.
Of course,
ravaging it. I could see it leading the world, like in deaths because of just the poverty and how the cartels run the country and how dirty it is.
Well, I mean, I think what's going to happen is, there's this argument of, well, you're not seeing it in Africa and Brazil and India. I would just say probably because they don't have the facilities to really test it. Okay. Now I'm sort of so Haratis has uploaded something into the Discord.
Okay.
And it's so that's to do with young people, and I think what we should do at this sort of initial stage, Addy, is you wanted to speak to wait, I don't have I'm sorry, my Discord has it's the wrong one. Maybe you can get into it, Addy. Well, I need to sort of into the Discord. So Horatius has put in a screenshot in the general tab.
Okay. Yeah, give me a sec.
I don't know if you.
I closed the link. But in the meantime, do you want to just give people an update of how things are going where you are? Because you're in Japan right now, right, in the mainland, and I have friends. I was on Okinawa for some time, and I called my friend yesterday. He said there's only, I think, 7 or 8 cases on Okinawa. No lockdown, but there is the awareness of that going on, obviously, as everybody with a phone or a TV screen knows. But yeah, what's the situation in Japan? Because I saw your video, your interview with Kev, and you said a young man just got diagnosed, and then an old man too, right near you.
Yeah, so right next to me, that's so there's 2 diagnoses literally within 10 minutes walk of where we are. But so there was a headline today that I saw. I want to say it was on the Guardian. That basically, maybe it's still there, but the Tokyo is warning of an explosion in cases. Now, what I'd been bitching about was that I felt that the Japanese authorities were not being transparent with how they were testing, and so I'm just looking at the headlines here. Coronavirus, China closes border to foreign nationals, global infections past 500,000. And I want to see if I can find the headline for Japan warning that there's going to be an explosion in cases. Let me just see if I can find that headline. But the point of it was, I said they're hiding the figures because they want to because of the Olympics, right?
Yeah, they want to hold on to it, right? But I just read that it got moved already to let.
Right, so it's got postponed now, right? So it's got pushed back a year. Now suddenly, as that happened, suddenly the Japanese are saying, "Oh, there's the cases are going to explode," right? So that just confirms in my mind that they were hiding them, and there was a concerted effort by the people who should have been there to protect the population. They'd made a calculated decision not to report on it, to keep it on the down low, in the hope that they could the Olympics would be okay. Yeah, it was naive in the extreme.
Oh yeah. Oh my goodness.
And now Japan is literally probably allowed itself to get highly contaminated um, uh, because of their sort of lack of testing. So it's very difficult to get testing. So actually, what was happening in Japan, people were going with symptoms, and they would sort of treat each one of the symptoms as a sort of standalone condition, but avoid trying to say that it was COVID, because if they do that, then suddenly there are all sorts of mechanisms kick in, and like the clinic will be closed down, and they have to
which is a bitch, and they don't want to do that. Not to mention, it's not good for the economy as well. So
and
they
so
obviously
they
don't want to do that.
Yeah, and they've literally just tried to hide it, and now it's just about to explode in their face. And they've gone on record as saying that there's going to be an explosion in cases. So they reported 40 cases yesterday in Tokyo, and have asked
to shoot up today.
And they're basically saying they want to shut down Tokyo for the weekend, but it's already it's in and doing its job.
Yeah.
And they're just
the inflection point has already been
oh
passed,
yeah,
so to speak, in that
yeah,
area, and in many areas, and that's why like the Surgeon General, like, again, like, I don't know, I'm really interested to see what happens in a year to this guy, because like, when people like understand in aggregate, in mass, like the lies that these people are telling, I'm just curious to see what's going to happen after all, because there's going to be just way more blood on these guys' hands.
Yeah, and that's the point that I was trying to make. I would say that these people have to be held accountable at professional level because of the deliberate misdirection. And his job, like what I think he should have done, and this is what a friend of mine said, what he should have done is basically stand up in front of the American people in the world and say, look, we don't understand what this is, and the thing to do is to try and make some sort of barrier. And he should have just done something and demonstrated to people that, one, you don't need some sort of high performance H100 N100 mask. You can get by with something just covering your face to stop you touching. And that's how they should have approached this, and basically said, we need those masks that are out there for the essential personnel. Right, and just being upfront about it.
Tell the fucking truth for once. And like,
yeah,
look, I get it, and it goes back to like the political thing, when the economy, blah blah blah, hands off. But when there's blood, blood on these people's hands, that's when the buck stops, in my opinion. That's when like you gotta not care about people's feelings. And I know that's like, young people are so concerned about this, but this thing, Mother Nature, I don't know. What do you think, Kevin? She doesn't give a shit about your 20 genders, about if you're a communist, if you're a fascist. Like this virus is indiscriminate, would you say?
Yeah, and I would agree to that. And actually, the one sort of saving grace of this pandemic is that the people who are leading these sort of fictive realities, especially those that are sort of reliant on pharmaceuticals to pretend they're a different gender, all that stuff's going to stop now.
Oh my God, you can't, because when you're dying, when your parents are dying, that's when you wake up, and right, like, because like that's the only way these people are going to realize that realize the truth is when they're dying, their parents are dying, their family's dying. They're going to be like, oh shit, like, I should have paid attention. What I believe is completely wrong. Like, this is reality right now.
Yeah, and like I say, a lot of people are in denial, and and let me just try and search.
And you also you are seeing, and this has happened from what I've read in every epidemic, just people taking advantage. There's scams coming up. There's people
Yeah.
trying to use this for whatever political ideology they have, and like all that shit. Like people don't get it, man. People do not get it. They're still playing teams. They're still playing red versus blue, men versus women, black versus white, and like it's just it needs to stop, man. It just needs to stop, or like there's not going to be many grandparents left, and there's going to be many young people dead in this country, and not just this country, because this country is the most powerful in the world. It has one of the best medical systems in terms of ability. And now think of like that's our situation. Now think about South America, Central America, Africa. Like what the fuck are they gonna do? You know,
it's well, but those people tend to be more grounded in reality to begin with.
Oh, I agree. I agree.
And so they're probably you know, the degree of suffering that they do go through on a day by day basis compared to the West is probably going to sort of inure them to the worst of it.
But when those people there too, I think they are really in tune with danger in a way that we are not, and I would say most people are not. And this guy Sean Atwood that I want to try to hook you up with, he was in jail for 6 years, and he said this. He said, being in jail, it forces you to become hyper aware of danger, and I like just that situation. Anyway, yeah, go ahead.
I know the name. I'm just. Could you tell me a little more about him? I'm trying to think where I do know.
Oh yeah, I can hook you up with him after our chat for sure. And send you his stuff, and I'll see if he wants to talk to you. I think he will, because of your credentials. But yeah, I have a friend in Milan who has been locked down for about 3 weeks. And I talked to her, and yeah, it's not getting better, and people and nobody's telling the truth except you know, a very small minority, and nobody's listening to them.
And I tell you another factor that's going on right now, and it gave me a very it stopped me in my tracks when I sort of started making videos, because I'd never done this type of thing before. Because of my research, I tried to sort of keep, you know, off people's radar, and what I did is I just copied the template of what other people did with like Streamlabs and things like that to sort of get what looked like a working streaming channel, and I put all like widgets in, and I very
cool channel for
but I very quickly removed them because it just I just had a sort of very ethical dilemma with respect to, I was basically going on to this sort of streaming, let's call it economy for want of a better word. And you know, most people are sort of doing it for clicks and subs and people trying to get on their Patreons and what have you. And I don't mind any, you know, I've got a deep respect for people who are making content every day. It's hard work. And if they can get support, then more power to them. But what I felt bad about was I was doing it in the context of COVID, right? And I would be trying to talk about these things, and then you'd hear like this little bling as people are sort of signing up, or if they donated a bit to what I'm doing. And I really sort of found it gross. And then people were saying, oh, you need to sort of see these people, and I can't remember what their names were, but like something sort of Video Eagles or something like that. But basically they were holding seminars on about how to profit your YouTube channel from this crisis, right?
Yeah, and YouTube they demonetized it for a bit, the term coronavirus. I don't know if they changed that or not, but yeah, I mean, and that's another thing too, is the deep mistrust of the corporate media in combination with these people who are just trying to make money.
And both are both have to be treated with caution. And you know, I say to people, I'm not selling anything. There's no t-shirts, there's no merchandise, I'm not selling any sort of potion or silver solution or anything like that, which a lot of people are. Sorry?
You're not selling indulgences?
No indulgences, nothing like that. And the only thing I am doing is just trying to give my time and expertise to people. And the only thing that I've asked is if they want to, there's no obligation, but just if you, as you leave the church, right, you put a penny in the collection box. I would be happy with that, because I don't.
You just let me interrupt, Kev. Anybody listening to this who's my listener, who wants to support Kev, I will put his YouTube channel in the description, and all his contact info as well.
I'd be very grateful.
You don't have a Patreon yet, but you do have Bitcoin, right? Because you're one of those geniuses.
Yeah. So I sort of, like I said, I sort of set them up, and but then I pulled them down, anything that was sort of like widgets that were on screen and everything, because I watched these people that were basically just sort of planning to profit off this. Yeah. And well, in my mind, you may as well put yourself in the same class of all these technocratic elites, and
right?
Yeah, and you're profiting from sort of people's misery, and
from human life.
Yeah, and that's I think there would be there's a serious price you're going to pay at some point down the line, and we can get into the metaphysics of that at another point. But what
at some point.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to sort of do this and open, because right now I don't work anymore. I did have a lab, but took a head injury, and I've been sort of partially working here and there, but I lost
Kevin?
Yeah, I mean, I still have to like medicate and stuff to deal with it, because it just sort of gave me this chronic like pain disorder. That's what they're calling it, and apparently it's common with head injury, TBI. And I mean, I'm better than a year ago, and I'm better than 3 years ago when I did it.
What did you were exercising?
No, you know what? I painting my house. We put scaffolding around the edge, and I just bent down to load my brush. And as I stood up at the peak of sort of standing up, I hit my head on the end of the scaffolding. So like it was. I basically describe it as like what center punch is.
Yeah, it's like that's blunt force trauma to the head.
Yeah, and I literally, what I remember is it just sort of. I remember it sort of rocking me into my heels, right? I felt like my nervous system jolt right into my feet. Mm-hmm. And then I can't remember anything about what happened after that. And the next thing I can remember is being in the house. It was dark, so I'd obviously been outside doing whatever. Mm-hmm. I don't know. I mean, my wife just seemed to assume I've been outside. And I remember sort of looking at the wall, and it just looked flat. So I'd lost sort of all depth perception. Mm. And and then the symptoms evolved over like the course of like a weeks to months. And I remember sort of getting up out of bed one morning, and I sort of, it was really painful and really stiff, and I sort of walked to the stairs, and I go to try and lift my leg to get down the stairs, and I couldn't lift my leg, right, because I was so stiff. And my initial thought was, oh, what I've done is because I work with agents that induce Parkinson's in test animals, I figured I'd had like an exposure to that, and I'd sort of induced a Parkinsonian model in myself. And it took a while for me, because the symptoms were separated from the initial event, right? So the concussion sort of resolved over the course of a few weeks. Mm-hmm. And then the stiffness came later, and the pain came later. So I didn't associate it with the injury itself. And I was struggling for months, just thinking, I'd cycle into work, and then all I could do was I would just lay down in the lab and just think, something's wrong. And then I would try, and just the day would pass. So I'd go back home and then just lay down there. And I was doing that for 6 months, not sure what was going on. And then I got out of my wife's car, because it's not my car. You develop like patterns, right? And so I get out, and the size of her roof is different relative to the seat, and I literally just brushed the the site where I'd cracked it on the scaffolding pole, and it literally was like, it's like getting punched in the face by Mike Tyson or something. It just my legs just went out from underneath me, and I remember just sort of like laying back across the two front seats. I remember coming round and then going, oh, and then I realized it was a head injury, right?
Oh, okay. So up
Right.
until then, you thought it was something.
I didn't know what it was.
You didn't know what it was.
Yeah, and I was just like, well, is it fatigue? I don't know. And you know, I'd sort of some days get a bit better, and
well, that's good. You're feeling better now. Maybe not 100%, but
yeah.
the video feed is way better, so I can actually see your face now, which is great.
Yeah, because I've got I'll fix the extender. I need to do that.
You're good, man. Yeah, this is it's really high quality now.
So
no, go ahead.
I sent you a link of the Tokyo and Hong Kong getting ready for a new bout. If you want to check your email. So and you know, my sort of personal issues aside, what I was saying is that I haven't worked, but in retrospect, what it allowed me to do is to sit and aggregate information, so I could watch this thing evolving from very early on, right? And if you want to sort of, I'm just reading this comment from Wizardry downstairs. Can you have a link, Wizardry, for that little girl? I'd like to see that, please. Is it possible to put links
in the comments?
Can he paste links in the comments? I'd like to see that.
Should be able to.
So so I was able to sort of see this thing evolving, and another sort of anecdote to this story. I don't know if you heard me speaking to Kev earlier about it. Was that people still sort of come to me, you know, regarding the sort of technical aspects of my work, sort of deep brain stimulation, and where I had my lab, which was in South Korea in a city called Daegu, they'd asked me to sort of come and give to help them in a project they were doing, and and that time was November. I want to say it was November into December, but late November, right? And at that time, I came back, and over the Christmas period, I got really, really ill, right? And it sort of left me, like the fever. I was delirious, so I can't. And again, so I get memory issues because of the head injury. And so apparently, when I was in the fever bit, I was coming downstairs and thinking days had passed. And it wasn't, you know, and it took me a week to sort of get over that, and then I was left just with, it's called dyspnea, where you can't really breathe. You're sort of panting, right? You're sort of like right, because you can't get air in.
So do you think you got it?
Oh yeah, and thing is, Daegu is ground zero for that little, well, not little, the cult that was spreading it.
You mentioned this.
Yeah.
They were Christians, right?
Yeah, there's some sort of bizarre Christian cult, and I'll try and find a link to them, but
I'll share it.
And they were responsible for spreading it around Korea, and they had this sort of Armageddon type wish, and they had set up a church in Wuhan the year before, and they were traveling backwards and forwards from Wuhan. So there's another little link in the chain as to what
there's a group of super spreaders there then.
Yeah, and I literally caught this this illness, and Shincheonji it's called, and let me just give you a link for that. That's BBC.
So your wife was taking care of you when you were sick?
As well as you can. I was just sort of hiding upstairs, and you know, I sort of, oh, sorry.
Oh, you're good.
That's just a video link, but I'll send you the link for that, and I guess I'd have to do it through email, right? That seems to be the best. Did you get that? No, I didn't send the Tokyo one. So here comes the Tokyo one, and here comes the Christian the Christian group.
Okay.
No, I don't want to go back. So hopefully that gets through to your email. So I think I did get an exposure because a lot of my symptoms fit, and it even left me with sort of angina and chest pain. And so a lot of these symptoms that people were describing, I was like, oh, and so I was really sort of keyed in and paying attention to what was going on in China. And that's just how I started watching the videos where people were just either keeling over, going into seizure, and then the spitting, the anger and the spitting. And it was the spitting that is what keyed me into, oh, there's something going on here. Okay, so this sort of gets to your point about you want to sort of address younger people, that they need to sort of pay attention. Okay, so it might be the case that COVID is a mild respiratory disorder to you, but it has the potential to transfect the nervous system. There's two pathways, one through the lungs where it will attack the medulla and brainstem. And right now, the people who are struggling in the hospitals, so that I had this great clip from Italy where this doctor is saying, we're supposed to be experts in dealing with this type of condition. They had all the equipment they needed, and they're probably like one of the best hospitals in the world, and they were like, we can't do anything for these people, right? Whereas normally we'd be able to treat them. These people are just not recovering. And I would make the argument that the reason is it's not just the respiratory pneumonia, it's not just the local tissues that are the problem. If the virus has got into the nervous system, which it has the potential to do, it's not unknown, it's in the scientific literature and has been for a long time, and if it's climbed up the brainstem and is attacking the medulla, then of course you're going to have problems establishing breathing without a machine. And I would probably have to check into the procedures of how they check whether someone is well enough to come off intubation, because you have to have, the person has to be under anesthesia, right? You can't get all those tubes into the trachea.
You can't be intubated when you're conscious.
No, it's like the reflex is too strong.
Yeah.
And so there must be some way that they're trying to test whether the patient will initiate automatic breathing. And I guess what they're doing is that they're probably sort of titrating the anesthetic level and switching and basically switching off the machine to see if there's a sort of an initiation of breathing. And probably what's happening is that initiation is not starting, so they're just going to have to switch them back onto the
that makes sense why they need the ventilators the whole time they're hospitalized.
Yeah. And if you can't treat the central nervous system component, you're basically fighting with one arm behind your back.
Yeah.
And as good as these clinicians and doctors are, a lot of them just aren't aware of this neural component to the disorder. Yeah. Right.
It's almost like someone, it puts a chip in your brainstem, right? And the brainstem or the medulla is the oldest part of the brain, as I understand it. So it travels up the spinal fluid to the medulla. This might be a really basic question, but what is the basic goal of the virus? It eats the body, or how does that work exactly?
So if you sort of take a step back and say, what's the purpose of viruses? Well, they seem to be sort of genetic packets that want to propagate in some fashion. And now at some point today, I've got to start addressing the people who say that viruses aren't real, or they're just consequences of normal cell function. That's literally something that's happening in the US right now.
Oh, I believe it. People believe it's flat earth and all this. I 100% believe it.
And I've literally got a bunch of comments that I need to get to, where literally they're saying to me, you have to prove to us that there is a virus, that viruses are a real thing. And I have to get to that and in some way address it. And I started to do it with Owen Benjamin. Do you know who he is?
I don't.
So Owen Benjamin is this comic that sort of fell from grace in Hollywood, because basically, and props to him for this, he sort of stood up and said giving hormones to 5-year-olds because the parents think they might be trans is child abuse, right? And yeah, look, he gets no issue from me. But what happened was that because of the political climate within Hollywood, he basically was made
he's blackballed.
Yeah, basically. And so what happened was he sort of retreated to he's in Washington State right now, and basically sort of began homesteading. But he goes online every day and streams every day, and he's got thousands of people that listen to him. And what he's done over the course of, I want to say, like 2-3 years, he's gone from sort of questioning the moon landing to going to the extreme of any sort of conspiracy type thinking or framework. And look, I'll hands up honest, I love I'm not wasting my time, but I read those sites, right? Because often you get bits of information in them that are useful that you're not going to get from the BBC.
Oh,
right.
Definitely.
Right. It's if you read comments and stuff like that. And I always find them useful. So that's why I sort of spend my time reading. So I was watching this guy sort of go through all these different phases, and it's a classic. If you want to get into the lore of it, it's hilarious. But he goes through this conversion from one, not believing in the moon landing, to essentially believing that the earth is flat. And you can watch this in real time. And then he sort of takes on a fundamentalist Christian worldview that's almost sort of like young earth creationist. And he's convinced that this virus is all a scam by, he calls them grabblers, basically implying Jewish people.
Yeah, it says on his profile that he's anti-Semitic.
Look, man, as far as I'm concerned, he can bitch and moan and say anything he wants, even if he's sort of saying the earth is flat. But once he starts telling thousands of people that something like a neurotropic virus, which is sweeping across the planet, is nothing but theater and shadows for this deep state that have pulled everything bad is linked to these people. And from 9/11 to whatever, everything sort of comes back to them, and they've got a multi-generational evil plan. And I'm prepared to discuss that because there's elements of truth in it that we could sort of go over. But he's got thousands of people convinced that viruses don't exist, right? And normally, if it was just flat Earth and it was 1,000, 5,000 crazies, because he gets thousands of people tuning in every day, it wouldn't bother me. But once you're sort of taking people's lives into your hands, he's got blood on his hands right now, right? Because there are people that are going to be listening to that sort of advice and engaging in risk-like behavior. And engaging in risk-like behavior where there's this agent that can hijack the nervous system and make you more impulsive anyway. Right? So there's like a sort of double whammy there of risk.
Yeah, I keep seeing mistake after mistake being made. And making one mistake, it just makes it easier to make another. And
yeah,
I mean, I just hope we can stop and reverse this trend.
And literally that's why I'm sort of doing what I'm doing right now. And I appreciate you sort of reaching out and sort of you're right in saying that there's an element of the younger generations that are not taking this seriously. And
look, I'm cool with you guys playing video games because I love it. I've been playing little video games, and when you're in the house all day, there's not much to do. But what I don't like is people just not heeding protocol. And speaking of that, how long have you been in isolation?
So I pulled my kids out of school in January. And because I'm at home anyway, I'm in isolation, and my wife was having to go to work.
So are you, and this might be informative for people too, you had the virus, you got over it. Are you worried about living with your family?
No, I mean, I think if I got it, so the earlier isoform was the less dangerous one, and it
Which
evolved.
is another thing people don't understand is these things are constantly mutating, right?
Right, and it already mutated into a more virulent strain, and that was weeks to months ago now, right?
Yeah.
And there's a good link in the Discord where you can sort of see. It's in the manuscript section,
Okay,
and you can
let me
just
pull that up again. Did you email me? I think you emailed me another link. Let me pull this one up first.
And you know what? I'm just going to use the bathroom whilst you're doing that. Thanks.
All right. Few-minute break, people. We'll be right back. Hey everyone, I am live streaming right now with PhD Kevin McCairn. He's a guy who's done a lot of research into these types of microbes, and he's a lot of useful information. It's on my YouTube channel right now.
Yeah, I do apologize. That's right. So you're looking at
Don't worry, man. I got some water, and here, let me just turn the volume off and keep watching this. Okay, go ahead, Kev.
Yeah, so you're just looking at the church, right? And all these well, it's a very bizarre church. They had very sort of strict criterias that how they would get people in. So they would infiltrate other churches, make them sort of go through different steps of initiation to see if they would be suitable for their own church. And then once they were in, yeah, they were sort of praying for the end of times. And the guy who was I think you can see him on the screen right there. He claimed that he was both Jesus and Satan at the same time, and he'd come back to initiate Armageddon. Right.
Really?
And yeah, look, dude, the story is nuts. And these people were literally they've arrested thousands of them. I want to say there was like 200,000 members of the church, and they've literally arrested thousands of them for deliberately spreading. And the leader, they're charging with murder and a whole bunch of stuff.
That is wow. Yeah,
yeah,
I mean, that's murder. That's terrorism. That's
yeah.
You could also say that's mass murder too.
Yeah. And the Koreans, for their faults, I did have a lab there for a number of years, and there were sorry,
you're in Osan or Seoul?
No, I was in Daegu, and Daegu is the epicenter of where the church was. Right, that's where they were based. Right, and that's why I think I just got exposed to the virus, because there's literally 200,000, or I don't know how many in the city, but there's probably literally tens of thousands of these people in the city itself. And I was there for a week giving a number of lectures and talks, And the thing when you go and do these things, you always get taken to bars and restaurants afterwards as a way of sort of saying thank you, right? They'll buy you dinner and
Definitely.
And so I was on trains. I was in Seoul. I was in Daegu, and it was hotels, bars, restaurants, and so aeroplanes. And so it's it's no surprise that it's unsurprising to me that I did catch something. And there's thousands and thousands of people that were identified in Korea, and I could have been patient zero coming into Japan, right? For all I know.
For all yeah. I was worried about that too, but fortunately, it just couldn't have been possible because I left 2 days early. But for a minute there, I was like, "Dang, it could have been me," because Washington's another hot spot, and they're really close.
You mean the city or the state?
Well, the state, but in particular, Seattle.
So you're close to Washington. You're close to Owen Benjamin.
Is he in Washington? I'm in Oregon right now.
No, okay.
No cases in the city limits yet. There's a soft lockdown, which and there's a lot of young people here, University of Oregon, who aren't heeding it. But fortunately, there's only 3 cases. Last I checked, in the whole county.
And Horatius is just saying in the chat that young adults are not safe from this after all. There's been a sort of feeling that it was targeting the elder people, but if Horatius is looking at the stats that we can't see, right, he's looking at the real stuff, and if he's seeing it in the EU, the US is about a month behind, I would say, from where
I would agree with that. I think I would say that's pretty accurate, a month.
And what you're just going to see is that because it's such a massive country as well, and you just get so many people coming into it, because they didn't declare the pandemic when they should have done, right? It should have been declared in January, right? As soon as they knew that they were dealing with some variant of SARS, which they did know, they released the genome really quickly in the end of December, beginning of January, right? And as soon as they saw that it was in any way approaching the infectivity that it had, that's when everything should have gone into lockdown, right? And everyone should have bit the bullet back then, and we might have just sort of got this under control and kept it in a
few pockets.
Yeah. Oh, don't say it's just public and no secrets here, Horatius. I want to maintain an air of secrecy and like we're doing secret agent stuff. Maintain image, sir. Horatius, please. You're my spy in the system. But let's say what Horatius says, I listen to. He's been spot on right from the beginning. And how did I get to know him was the only person that was really sort of consistently reporting about it was Agenda Free TV. Are you familiar with that?
I am not.
Okay, so he's a well, how would you describe his shtick is to sort of try to report in real time, and then he just sort of announces headlines that come up in real time, and he sort of makes a news broadcast out of that and sort of adds his opinions in on the side. And basically I sort of was watching that, and I went onto their Discord, which is an unofficial Discord, and there was this very, very obvious push by people who were covering for the Chinese, right? When the statistics coming out and the video footage coming out was telling an absolutely different story, right? And literally I would sort of put it like it was like a literal sort of troll farm, not troll farm, but people there sort of pushing CCP.
Were these people that were, I guess, working on behalf of the communists?
So I mean, Horatius can sort of back me up on this, and it was just a lot of it was I would say English teachers that are just sort of they were being given a sort of somewhat cushy existence in China. But I also think there were, people probably from the Chinese Communist Party who were trying to sort of mitigate damage. And so what do you do? What did the Chinese do? Well, they have their own firewall, right, for the country. And it doesn't take much to have individuals that can search
And bypass
YouTube. No, not the people who are bypassing it, but the people who want to put forward the Chinese version, right? They're going to look for these chat rooms and discords, and there was just this really, really bizarre back and forth of well, I tend to be rather blunt when
that's good when scientists are blunt.
but it was sort of getting me banned from their Discord, right? And basically they were more worried about the feelings of the people who were posting.
This needs to stop.
Sorry?
This needs to stop.
Yeah. And and basically the problem I've had is I've just met a wall of noise in trying to get this message out. I've been trying to do this for over a month, and it's only in the last sort of week or so that I've managed to sort of get people interested enough, like yourself, that want to talk and want to try and get a message out to.
Yeah, I'll get you hooked up with Sean, man. I'm sure he would be really interested in talking to you. He has been doing interviews with citizens right now from the hotspots, like my friend Milan and New York. He just posted one. I think it was in Greece. So he's contacting citizens all over the world, but he's only had a few scientists and I guess professionals on. So I think he really appreciate your input, and he has a lot of viewers in both the US and the UK. So I think that would be super great. And he's probably booked for the rest of the day, but he might even be able to do it tomorrow. And he's in London, so yeah,
like I say, I know his name, and
yeah, he's blowing up, man. He's got 400K right now, and maybe a year and a half ago he had less than 100K. So he's been really tracking it really closely, along with the Epstein stuff. But this coronavirus stuff is just taking over everything. Speaking of that, I'm sure all those like pedophiles and they're just so happy this came, aren't they? Like to cover up the Epstein thing.
Yeah, I mean, this whole that's another deep topic of conversation to get into, and I do have very strong opinions in that regard to what I consider a degenerate element within our public bodies that are using things like the Epstein circles to entrap people and then use it as blackmail. But then there's this, it's not just that, there's a whole culture of child abuse that seems rampant within pretty much any institution that you look at right now. And I think we as people, I'm a father to 3 young children. I think it's time that we rooted these people out, root and branch, from our institutes, and we hold them accountable. So whether that's Muslim rape gangs or whether it's freaks like I'm just looking through Sean's list here, and he's going to be talking about Jimmy Savile and all those freaks, right? And all those people that are trafficking in child pedophilia, and like when if people want to say to me like the what was it, Comet Pizzagate, and what was the store called? Ping Pong? No.
Is that Woking Pizza in London? Is that what you're talking about?
No, the one that was in the US, right? So there was the guy. Oh god damn it! They called it Pizzagate as a.
Oh yeah, it was the email hacking, wasn't it, with the Clintons?
Yeah, and so Podesta, right? So Podesta,
the Podesta brothers,
yeah, and so and then you start sort of seeing stuff sort of coming out that's sort of from their social circle, and like all the artwork they're into is like really deviant, and you just see
the
these.
Dahmers, they got like Dahmer artwork.
Yeah, and then there was the chair of not chair, but the head of Congress. I forgot his name now. He got convicted of. He was like Speaker of the House or something like that. He got convicted of paedophilia, and they just gave him some ridiculously soft sentence. And all this stuff is going on. It's been going on for years, and you could argue centuries, right? I mean, it's probably embedded in the culture in such a deep way. And look, I know from my career that there's a type of game you play to sort of climb up the hierarchy, the ladder of career progression. And I didn't see anything amounting to something like Epstein levels, but what I did see was very obvious sort of backdoor dealings with respect to awarding grants. It was you would award stuff to friends, and even stuff like reviews and stuff like that. When you send a manuscript for review, you can request who reviews your manuscript and who doesn't, right? And there's just a whole network of people putting in reviewers that they know will be favorable to their publication, right?
And related to what you are talking about and Epstein, I think this virus is like it's created such a power vacuum that everyone is trying to take a hold of, right? Everyone's trying to take advantage of it. And I think the US citizens and citizens in general can, if they're vigilant, can weed out a lot of these rats, like you said before, and I think in Kev's broadcast that in the WHO, right, they're just rats. And it seems to be like, without exception, every single institution.
I would just say all of our institutions are broken at some level.
Speaking for the Americans too, I mean, well, for myself, in what seems to be no trust for any institutions except the military, and even that is dwindling.
Well, I mean, I've been saying to people right now, the military is not your friend. Okay, be very, very wary while they're trying to, and they are maneuvering themselves into a position where they are going to start instantiating martial law. They can't.
There's tanks in LA right now. They got there last night.
And they're not going to snap their fingers and do it. They're going to do it gradually.
Oh yeah,
right.
They're going to do one step and then wait a little bit, another step and then wait a little bit.
Yeah, and this is why. So the reason I'm doing what I'm doing is to try to get people informed as much as possible to the condition itself, right? So you can talk back to the authorities from a position of competence or knowledge. Exactly. Right, when they're saying, and so yes, there is a risk from this virus, but but if we understand it properly, what we should be able to do is to unwind all the institutional mechanisms that have kicked into place, like the bringing of the military into civilian areas and putting them under martial law. Right, that there has to be controls for that, because there are these power mad people that will just take this situation and run wild with it.
Yeah, and I don't think a lot of, and this is something that I think, well, honestly, I came to this idea on my own, but I think I saw it repeated by Jordan Peterson. It seems to be, it seems to me that a lot of people, especially young people, don't seem to understand darkness and that sort of psychopathy and just the dark side in general. They almost don't even know that exists, or they are in denial of it existing, which I think informs a lot of their political ideologies and denials.
Yeah, so I call it fictive reality. And what's fictive reality? So in neuroscience, there's a preparation called fictive motion, where you can, and it's done in cats. And basically you can sort of decerebrate the cat and sort of leave like the brain stem part of the cerebellum, you can stand the cat on a treadmill, and the cat will engage in activities that almost look like they look normal, right? But there's no brain in there to sort of control it. It's all sort of reflex, and so that's called fictive locomotion, meaning sort of it looks real, kind of real, but it's not. It's fake, essentially. And what's happening is that young people right now, and that's a consequence of the information technologies that are available right now, have got themselves into sort of self-reinforcing information bubbles.
Yep.
And yeah, and they're leading fictive realities. Okay. And I don't want to sort of drag into, like, because I've been in these debates with Americans about, you know, the right and left, and which one, you know, which one's better versus capitalism versus socialism, etc., etc. In my mind, both have good and bad elements to them, and you just need to use them properly depending on the situation you're in. And so I would say a lot of the reason that our public institutions have got corrupted is that we've put a sort of free market reward system in there, where people instead of sort of serving the position in a public service manner, have sort of taken it upon themselves as winner takes all, and I'm going to get as much out of this as I can. And as a consequence, what it's done is erode the infrastructure that's there that should have been there to protect the institute and protect the people that the institute is supposed to be serving, right? And this will bring us back round to the World Health Organization, and I can absolutely guarantee you this, that those people who are part of that institute absolutely believe that they're doing the right thing, right? And that's the problem that you're dealing with at a very fundamental level. It doesn't matter what you think, right? Whether, and you can have science and facts on your side, etc. If they if the other person believes it, right, you've got to get over their own what was it? I mean, like a good example would be like religious beliefs, right? So think of it in those terms, where someone is going to sort of, and if you sort of talked about Jordan Peterson, he uses the phrase they become ideologically possessed, right? And so they buy into a philosophy or argument, and he talks about neo-modernism as an extension of the communist mindset, and you know, it's compelling. It's a compelling argument that he makes. The one problem I have with him is that he came out sort of guns blazing, and I would say he just sort of he melted away into the backdrop as the money got bigger and the tours got bigger, and then he could have, if he'd kept himself more focused and less worried about the reputation and the money, and sort of focused on the message, then he could have got much more important information out. So if he wants to stand in front of people and say, look, the neo-modern philosophy has it's an extension of the communist ideology, and he wants to use Solzhenitsyn's Gulag Archipelago as a metric by which we should be judging our own cultures. And he's right that in policing language the way that we're basically turning into that sort of totalitarian state. So there was political correctness in the Soviet system, and people abided by it, and in doing so you become complicit in its propagation, right? So silence is consent, and the West is currently in this is in a state of flux as we try to sort of wrestle with these new ideas and attacks against whatever label you want to sort of give it.
Liberty. I would say
liberty. Yeah. So in my mind, I sort of think of it as it's the freedom from serfdom that was first instantiated in the Magna Carta. From Magna Carta, we went to the Declaration of Independence and the rights enshrined in that, and that I think should be the model that we're using when trying to sort of structure ourselves with respect to
society,
society and how we conduct ourselves politically. And so
I agree. Committing or understanding the ideology and the document, and not attaching your loyalty to someone who claims to be a supporter of that when in reality they are not.
And so Jordan Peterson makes a very cogent argument that, okay, you've been given rights by this culture and society, but with those rights actually become their responsibilities come with it, right? And right now what you're going to watch is this clash of so the freedoms that are enshrined to you that come from the creator and manifest in the United States. You're going to watch the people that don't fully understand that take the situation and they're not going to do the responsible thing, especially if people of good intent and ethics are sitting around and having this discussion and saying, well, hang on a minute, this looks like a war of some kind. We don't know who started it. We'll get to the bottom of that later. But right now, we need to be thinking about how we organize ourselves under such a situation, right? And if you've got young people completely ignoring it, or if you've got swathes of the population who are in denial that even viruses exist, the Earth is flat, and they're their own reality engine, and all this is just a diabolical plan. All those people need getting control of, and the philosophies and obligations of the constitutions and of what comes from the Anglosphere, I would say that the individual rights and liberties, that you are sovereign, are protected. Right now, if you have people right now who under the current circumstances are just going to say just fuck it, I'm sorry, to the current situation, and they what they're doing is they're giving excuses to the people that want to take away your rights to begin with. As soon as you give them an inch, they're going to take a mile, right? And that happened after 9/11. Okay, so you've still got the Patriot Act, and I would make the argument that probably America never really recovered fully.
Sure. Yeah,
right.
None of that has been regressed. If anything, it has gotten worse under Obama, and I'm sure under Trump now.
Yeah, and right now you're going to watch it be played out in a way of it's the nanny state. Nanny knows best, and nanny is going to guard you with armed soldiers to make sure you're going to adhere to this situation. And my argument would be, well, we shouldn't have got into this situation in the first place if we'd listened to the experts. Well, no, they were listening to the wrong experts. That's the problem. And they were listening to people that were just interested in the game of climbing the hierarchy of the institutes that they're in. And right now that's impacting everyday people like myself and yourself. I'm hoping Oregon, you've got pretty low density population, right? So
Yeah, it's pretty spread out. I'm in one of the bigger cities, but
okay.
fortunately, I don't think it's. I mean, I've only been here, like I said, I just got here from Italy, so I just escaped out of Italy. So I don't know the state that well, but it seems to be not a big shipping hub or transportation hub. Or I mean, you'd think that more cases would have came, but fortunately, that's not the case.
And this is where I think so. Horatius has got to take a break. So Horatius, take care,
Okay.
sir. And
Appreciate it, Horatius.
he's a good one to have on board. And like I say, I'm trying to stream like every day, and if we can get this message out, and if you've got, if you want it, what we have to do is we have to start challenging the people that are making the decisions and saying, well, why are you doing this? Okay, so if we accept the fact that we have to do some type of I'm not going to say quarantine, right? We have to, what we have to do is we have to take a defensive posture to an emergent phenomenon, and until we understand it better, right, don't give it any opportunity to sort of impact your life more.
Right.
Okay.
As Mr. Miyagi said, the best defense is to not be there.
Yeah. Walk away from trouble. And I've got a very good friend in Pennsylvania, and he's a I want to say, like, he's peak Americana for me, right? He's this massive, strong dude that's just he knows the ins and outs of the Constitution and the history and the political machinery in the United States better than any professional talking head that you would see on the TV, right? And he's been preparing for this. Well, you would put him in the sort of prepper category, I guess.
Yeah.
He's well armed, and he has supplies, and
Tim Ferriss has been in self-isolation for over a month now.
I'm not sure who that is, but
he's like a productivity guy, but he's got a really big following.
Okay, is that Peak Prosperity?
No, he's like the 4-hour guy. Like he's got like 1 million followers on Twitter. His YouTube, he just made a YouTube, I think, like last year, and he's already got like 300K. But yeah, unfortunately, I stopped like listening to his podcasts a year ago, so I wasn't up on it. But I did see Sean warning people like 2 weeks ago, in a very urgent way, and so yeah, fortunately, I did get that message.
So yeah, and I would so my sort of message at this point is especially America, right now you're just gonna have to accept the fact that because there was such high levels of competence, there has stuff kicked in. Don't get into sort of paranoid thinking right now. What you have to do is just get yourself into a position where, one, you're educating yourself about the situation. So that means not only listening to people like myself who can probably speak to elements of the disease or the neuroscience that most people wouldn't be up to speed with, but other people who understand the aspects with
situation.
Yeah. So that as it relates to constitutional law, and my understanding is that because they can instigate a medical martial law, that right now they can supersede your constitutional rights. So if that's the case, what needs to happen is you need to, and especially if they're closing people down who are trying to talk about it on things like YouTube, you have to build networks and maintain communication backwards and forwards between those networks, and whether it has to be I don't know, just like text messaging and stuff, but people need to be aware. And if it comes down to me just having to sort of not Google, but use email to send presentations to, and literally have one-on-one conversations, I'll do that if it has to get to that point that they shut things down. But let's not give them a chance to literally just steamroller us, so they they could push us towards a. I'll choose my words carefully here. So there's an argument that there's this push towards a one world government.
I have
right?
heard that, and
Right.
I have been doing a bit of research on that in the last couple of weeks. What do you think about that, Kevin?
Well, I would for sure say that the political landscape is such that you can see in the history in recent history. So let's say from the Second World War,
Huge turning event in world politics. I would say, I mean, the biggest one that has affected everything today, which I don't think a lot of people realize.
And we're still dealing with the consequences of it, and you're watching that sort of unfurl. And I think like the best indicator for that is Europe, right? So Europe
always isn't it always Europe, because you have so many countries, all highly populated, all speak their own language and have their own cultures and the cultures, and they're all like mashed together. So I think it's always the best example.
Yeah, and so a very germane example right now is Italy. So Italy under massive stress from this virus, which is real, people. If you're listening and having any doubts, okay, it is real, and that country is being pushed to breaking point, and it was the Russians and the Chinese which were able to capitalize on that situation, while the EU dithered, right, and didn't provide support to the Italians. And already the Italians are a nation that's essentially split politically.
Yeah,
okay.
Like many countries today.
And right now there is pushback against that sort of global type. That sort of push where in the West, in order to save a penny on the dollar, we basically ripped the guts out of our cultures, transplanted all our manufacturing and technology into places like China, because the CEOs would get an extra $1 million bonus by saving. And because that has
some dude named Ping will work for 10 cents an hour for 8 hours without a bathroom break. And another thing people don't understand.
Yeah, and by sort of opening up the borders in such a way, so this is where the libertarian arguments, when I sort of start listening to libertarians, I just say that it's a nonsense type philosophy, because it's just a race to the bottom in terms of who's going to do stuff cheaper. And the idea that somehow the market is going to the hidden hand of the market is going to be
going up.
Yeah, it's absurd.
Yeah.
Right. And right now you're seeing the consequences of that after 40 years of people of the generation before. So people sort of pick out boomers, etc., but they were the people that did it, right? They were the ones that remortgaged everything, right? So suddenly everything's become a debt-based economy, right? So it wasn't that long ago that currencies were backed by gold. It was in the 60s and 70s that they sort of unhooked
I ranted about this on my Snapchat, which only has like 100 people on it, but that's another thing Americans, I think, don't understand, especially young people, is our currency is not backed by anything. There's no gold in a safe somewhere that is backed by it. It's completely based on belief and trust, collective belief and trust by the collective high brain of the population.
Well, the pushback you get in that respect is that they'll say that the fiat currency is based not on gold, but it's based on the trading and technical power of the country, right? So if you're doing enough trade, that's the backing of the currency, okay? But what happens is that you get into, once you start using debt as the metric by which you grow your economy, right? So the $3 trillion that the United States Treasury is just, it's not even the Treasury, it's the Treasury, right? Yeah, so it's the Treasury which authorizes the Federal Reserve to print. They don't even print money; it's just digits, right, on a screen, and they can take that money and then with fractional reserve lending, they can just blow it up 1,000 times more very, very quickly, right? And so and so people think, well, more money, that's a good thing, but then the value of your money drops because there's they're trying to, yeah, and they're trying to just artificially keep the economy running. And this is where I'm, you know, I probably sort of split from a lot of the sort of American ideals for the free market.
Oh no, I don't agree with the printing of more money.
Okay, well, it's okay. I would take this view. If you're going to print money, right, get it to the people that need it, because what happens right now is that there's a it's socialism for the industries,
Yeah.
right? So
Which
all the
isn't
industries.
socialism. That's not socialism.
Well, it's a kind of you could say crony capitalism, but the losses of companies get socialized, right? And so if the banks are on collapse, the governments step in and stop the bank collapsing, right? And sort of maintain the system to keep going. That's what happened in 2008, right? And I would sort of take the view, well, actually what should have happened was, if those banks were insolvent and they were riddled with debt in the way that they were, and they were doing that, I forget the type of trading it's called now, but you know, they sort of wrap not inside it, but they wrap so when they're doing sort of like the stock markets, and people buy financial instruments, and inside those instruments are like investments, and so this is where all the mortgages come in, and but people had mortgages they couldn't pay, but all these debts were wrapped up in these financial tools that were sold to give a return after sort of so many years, much like the WHO had a thing with the World Bank.
Yeah.
And then what happens is that there's a the underlying financial structures, so all the loans are bad, and then that doesn't come through, and then the banks have basically bought and traded in these sketchy loans, and then you get to the point where there becomes a run on the bank, so people want to get their money out of the bank before the bank tries to use it to cover the bad debts that they've taken on in terms of their market trading. What happens is the government comes in, they give the money to the directly to the banks, and then the idea is that, well, the banks are supposed to pay some back. That's what happened in the UK. But what do? They just tax people more, right, to try and recover the cost back. So not only I would just say, cut out the middleman, let the bank go bust, and if people are in yeah, right, and get the money to the people that are actually on the ground, and you know, those people that have sold out themselves to it's basically the worship of mammon and money and wealth, and they gamed the system to get into a situation where banks are insolvent, right? They need to go, right? And so I mean, we're sort of straying from the point of the initial conversation, which is
no, I love this, man. Do you have any, because you did mention it quickly, I just wanted to talk about the possibility of violence and in that sort of lane, but I do need to use the bathroom, so let's take a quick 2-minute break if that's cool.
Yeah, I'll do the same, so.
Okay.
Yeah, so you wanted to sort of get to the issue about violence and so what I would call increased impulsivity.
All right, give me a sec, Kev. Gotta get this sweatshirt on. It's a little chilly in here.
Yeah, actually, just give me a second because it's raining and cold this morning. I just want to put some heating on. Give me 1 second.
Okay. All right, and we are back.
I'm just looking at the so Wizardry is like mortgage-backed securities. Wizardry is just like he's on point, man. he's another really good one to just have commenting in your feeds, and
Nice. He
he's
says that 2.2 trillion will be given to the Fed to create derivatives of 4.5 trillion. The banks will lend with interest of that 4 trillion.
And dude, most people can't even imagine what a million looks like, right?
Yeah.
And a trillion, right? These numbers are just
they're hard to grasp even for people that are extremely intelligent. I think when you say, let alone like most people.
Unless you're sort of dealing in that sort of scale range, right? On a regular basis, you just most people are just not even close to grasping what those numbers mean, right? And it has to get to a point where people have to say no more. Okay, we're not going to be beholden to this sort of debt-based economy anymore because it's obviously broken. And I'm going to segue into something before we get to the violence because it sort of bubbled up into my mind, and it sort of I think it could sort of apply to your audience if they're the lucky ones that have the youth.
Oh yeah, I would say that's most of them in terms of people I know personally, but my YouTube audience is quite diverse.
Okay, so what I would say is that the turning of education and universities into essentially businesses, and where young people are obliged to essentially mortgage themselves for a lifetime to get a degree for like 3 years, 4 years of study. I think has been.
Go ahead.
Go on.
No,
well, I was
say that people. I don't know how old are you, Kevin? Can I ask that?
Old.
Okay. Well, people older than you, I would say, like my grandparents' demographic, they are like, but even then, like my parents' demographic too, like they don't understand it, like I think the deleteriousness of this situation. Give me a sec, my cat.
Yeah, no worries.
They don't understand, the danger of it.
And you know so you speak to sort of older people, and they'll have the idea that you sort of pull yourself up by your bootstraps, and you go ahead, and that's how you get through life. But I don't think the consequences weren't thought through, where we turned our institutes of higher education into places where essentially the degree has become worthless, yet the cost to get it has become well, I would use the word mortgage because that literally translates to death grip, right? And we're putting young people into these situations where not only do they get into debt before they even start working, you're then putting them into situations where the housing market has been skewed in such a way that people just can't even get onto the property ladders anymore, right? And so you're creating a lot of social tension, especially in the younger generation that are just sort of looking at these people that are retiring. Like, I don't have pensions. I've spent my whole career literally moving from country to country to be able to do the work that I've done. And I'm basically, you could basically say that I'm a well-skilled element of the globalized system, right? And
almost, would you say you're like maybe a scientific contractor in a sense, or
to a degree? You know, that I basically got a sort of relatively stabilized position in Korea, but you know, this ties into the corruption of institutes. So as a scientist, when you go to start up a lab, you sort of negotiate the funding that you're supposed to get and the facilities that you're supposed to get. And you know, this is a long story that I should probably, I'll come back to at another point.
okay,
But
for sure. I was just gonna say too about the educational system that I think those people, like the older people I was saying, they don't understand the danger of it, but they also still trust it, I think, and that's the reason why.
Yeah.
Like for example, like people in my family who are educators or who educators I know personally, yeah, they still trust the system, I think, a lot of people.
Yeah. Well, because the system is still probably working for them and enabling them to maintain a lifestyle that young people right now, if they're having to start off on their own, you know, without some sort of like generational wealth support, right? And that's and a lot of people are in that situation. You've essentially push these people outside of the culture that you were hoping to build, and the debt has just got so insane, and it's going to get even more insane now that they've done this this bailout. And you know, there's
it's just it's crazy. It's so crazy. I was talking to this girl in the grocery store a couple weeks ago, and she's about to graduate or whatever. I was like, "What are you gonna do?" She's like, "Oh, I'm gonna go back to my parents' house and pay off my debt." I was like, "Probably like all of these kids right now."
Yeah, but that's what they're doing. And look, even someone like myself that's got a well-established and published scientific career, right? It's impossible for me to get something. But I don't have any pensions, don't have anything like that, and well, what little savings I had have gone because I was unable to work, and I know that I'm lucky just to be able to be getting scraping by, and I know that there are people in much worse situations, especially like now in the US. You've got these people that have been hooked into sort of the debt-based economy where you're flipping credit cards to sort of cover the cost of expenses and loans, and it's an unsustainable system. And I think what you're going to see is this pandemic is going to stress test it to the point where it can't recover.
Yeah, I think it's going to break it too. I agree, and I think in that sense it is a good thing, but it's not going to feel that way for a long time, I think.
Oh, it's going to be very painful. Trust me on that. And
it's a wake-up call in many senses that I think is very much needed on multiple levels.
And so this comes back to the Peter Navarro who I was talking about. So if you've got people in power that have basically decided that the globalist model that was introduced, where China was given favored trading status, and you know they basically were able to undercut all the workers and decimate the middle class of Europe and the US and build their own. And we're in a situation where, like I say, it's not a hot war, but it's kind of it's lukewarm. Right?
It's only getting warmer. It's only heating up, right? It's like it's starting to boil, right? It's simmering.
Yeah.
But it's getting there.
If you've got when Donald Trump is standing up in front of people saying it's the China flu, right? I mean, to me, I found it hilarious when he was doing that, and he's sort of speaking to that reporter, and you can see all these people that have bought into the fictive reality of this. You basically call it like in the UK we call it privilege bingo, right? So if you're a particular class of individual, you've got certain poker, right? So what cards do you have as when you're dealing with these systems? You know, are you a person of color? Are you, what's your sexual orientation, and all these things which sort of tie into the argument that Jordan Peterson makes, right? That you're making by establishing these social codes and giving I don't want to say victim status, but it's kind of
that's what
people,
it is, though, isn't it?
To be blunt, yeah. But I was trying to think of a more
euphemistic way to say it.
yeah, without sort of, you don't want to get pulled from YouTube right now.
I 100% agree. I 100% agree, and you have to be careful with what you put on your titles and stuff. But I haven't had any troubles, fortunately, yet. But yeah,
well,
we'll see.
Dude, if we're calling out the Surgeon General, calling him incompetent,
but I mean, who cannot do that, you know? And related to what you just mentioned about all the poker game. It seems to me the only reason he got hired is because he's
it's diversity hire. Yeah, that's yeah. You're right on the money with that, and I would agree with that 100%. And this is the problem that we've got, because we've left out competence in favor of these quotas, these diversity quotas, right? And look, I have the reverse situation in Japan. Whereas if I'd been able to, there's our baby-faced individual. There he is.
What's this guy's name again?
Jerome Adams.
Jerome Adams.
Okay. Look, he's got 0 publications. Well, he's got a couple. He's not performed in the military. He hasn't served in the military in any capacity. And from what I can sort of read of him, he's not some world leading expert in the field that he is, and he's basically an anesthetologist, right?
Anesthetologist? What is that?
People, that's the person that's going to give you anesthesia for surgery.
Oh, and anesthesiologist, right?
Yeah. What did I say?
You said anesthetologist, I think.
Yeah, so that's the right way to say it. That's the British way. We will.
Yeah, well, we spell color without a U, so.
Well, you know what? I tend to use American spellings for writing.
You do? Okay.
Yeah, it's more practical.
It's funny. I got interviews with these 2 guys from England on my channel, and when I was there in London earlier this year, they were talking, and their slang it's so entertaining. The word geezer,
geezer,
yeah,
he's a geezer.
Yeah, was he a black geezer? Was he a white
geezer? Yeah, it's funny. I like it, but that person you have pulled up there, he's not competent to be in the position he's in, and especially under the current circumstances, right? If there was some degree of hierarchy of competence within that administration, right? As soon as the I'm just reading the comment from Wizardry. We'll get to that. He raises a good point, but
we're gonna stack Wizardry.
Once people have sort of recognized that there is a problem, right? That guy is obliged to go in front of the nation and just say, look, I didn't perform my job properly, because that's his job, right? And if I was in his position, I would have Well, the thing I would have done is basically said, well, masks do help. The science was there to back it up, and given people advice on how to do it, as well as the social distancing and the cleaning of hands, right? So, because what we have right now is we have the coughers and the spitters, which is what I'm sort of focused on my channel with respect to
your background.
Yeah, and that's the thing that caught my eye, and it's coming out in the reports that what I sort of predicted is coming true. But had these people said people wear a mask and some eye covering, that would have just mitigated this whole problem straight away, right?
It would have mitigated a lot of it, I think. And I don't know. The fact that I don't see outrage at this is very telling on many levels. And I don't know. I mean, he should admit that he's wrong and step the fuck up, or step down, or he should be replaced. Like, regardless of what he actually wants. But I doubt that's gonna happen.
He should be out, and someone who does have competency step in. And actually, this is a good sort of segue into what Wizardry is saying right now. So after he's talking about the minting of the coins, so he says there's no shipments coming from China, and there are no plans for China to trade again with the US. It's the Chinese, but yeah. So you're in war, right? And this is what Peter Navarro was talking about, and this is what he's advocating for. And so there's going to be a period of pain and adjustment as the manufacturing comes back to the and where something like the Trump administration is trying to institute this very large change in the want of a better word, the trading posture of the country, right? And so turning away from China, becoming more self-sufficient. The next thing that Wizardry brings up is this neo-modernist Marxist destruction of our institutes, right? So this is where the institutes have got broken, right? Yep. And you've got people in there that shouldn't be there, because more than likely, one, it's either a fix where it's just a degree of nepotism that's got them in, so family connection, or it becomes a diversity hire, right? I'm not saying that the person who's matched that, so in the UK they call it common purpose, but so basically it's just these social criteria that they want to implement, the social engineering to try to bring people, women into the workplace. And and if you ask me, it might sound controversial, even though my wife does have to go to work, but she didn't when I was working before my head injury. With young kids, I think women shouldn't be going to work, right? It's much more traditional here in Japan, where it's a male dominated workforce, and women tend to do the more sort of ancillary roles. Okay.
And related to that, I had this thought that I came through reading, and this idea that's out there, that the reason they are encouraging women to not have kids or to prolong having kids is to keep them in this economic machine, or keep them going to school and getting these loans, and making the elite, the 1%, more money. So they're selling this, I think, idea. And again, I don't think either of us are against a woman's right to have the opportunity to work.
No.
But I'm against manipulation at a mass scale that negatively affects us all.
Yeah, and that's very eloquently put. And we can get to Wizardry's final comment, which is
Marxist manifesto.
Yeah, and once you mix up the concepts, the base realities that, but look, biology is objectively a real thing, right?
Yeah.
And so
it's a hard science.
Yeah, it's a hard science, and when the science says that there's a bimodal distribution in the traits of hominids between male and female, okay, we have to accept that there are those differences, and they each have different roles to play within the what should be a sort of harmonious interaction with the environment and other people, and
the other sex, a complementary relationship.
yeah, but as soon as you start distorting that, okay, you the institutions then begin to crumble, and that's what you're seeing emerge right now. And like I say, these systems are going to be stress test in ways that these people are not even one iota of being prepared for.
Yeah. Do you think that the because I think they've done this slowly. I mean, Hitler said, "Take the men out of the household and make the women and children dependent on the state, and you have total control." I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but it kind of seems like that's what's been going on over the past 10 years. Do you think that they're gonna make more, I guess, overt or explicit moves with regards to that, or do you not agree with that, or what do you think?
No, I mean, I agree with the premise that, you know, they've by the state sort of taking on the responsibility of the child rearing, and this sort of ties into multiple elements of culture, and so where the state steps in and allows women to have babies without fathers and mothers, that then begins to distort the social fabric, and
it kind of turns possibly each woman into an independent state baby factory almost.
Yeah, and then what does that woman do? She gets to the point where she can palm off the child to a nursery of some kind, which the state pays for usually, and then she'll engage in, you know, Mrs. Jane Average probably goes to a cubicle job, or you know something along those lines, and that to me, you've chalked one up for the bad side there, right? Because
agree.
that's an assault on what we understand to be the most stable configuration for society, which is to have complete families, and I would say extended families. And that's something that's very apparent to me through the fact that I've ended up in Japan and I've got children in Japan, and you know what? We don't have any relatives around us, right?
Yeah.
And so the kids don't know what grandparents are. They don't know what uncles and aunts are. It's a very sort of limited cultural. It's not cultural. The family environment is different to what I understood when I was growing up.
Yeah.
Okay, and that's a consequence of me following this globalist blueprint, right? So I went where the work was, and where I could get money, and I'm separated from the root of my family by 12 hours of flight time.
Oh yeah, same man. I got family in Wisconsin. I got family in Germany, in Italy, Mexico, U.S. Yeah, and it's and most of them are working, jobs that obviously required them to be there. So yeah, and like all my siblings, we're pretty much all in different states.
So how many?
Becoming more and more common.
Yeah, it is the norm, and that's what they want. Once they fragment the families, right? So let's just say, let's game theory the worst example that could emerge right now. Okay, that the virus mutates as of now, and the morbidity rate goes from 16% to 50%, right? And I'm not saying it's going to do that, but I'm just playing a hypothetical, right? And so what happens is when the martial law kicks in, and you've got you are under force of arms required to comply to the laws that because martial law will be different, right? whatever you think is normal law, that's gone. And
I don't think people can conceptualize that too. Martial law is do what I say, or you're gonna get locked up essentially, or worse.
Or worse, yeah, minimum locked up.
Minimum, and they only can lock up so many people.
Yeah, and there's this is why, you know, I'm very concerned about the situation in the US, and I'm trying to do what I'm doing with respect to spreading you know, another insight into how the disorder works. And this is why I'm saying you've got to be careful of the impulsivity that comes from that could potentially come from the hijacking of the limbic system, which the virus can attack. And we already know it's doing it because people are reporting loss of smell, hearing,
even
wizardry,
before any other symptoms.
Yeah. Yeah, and so basically, it's not even giving them pneumonia; it's hijacking the symptom, the nervous system straight away. And I wanted to see Wizardry's comment about the girl from Plymouth. Yeah, did we get a link for that? I would like to see that.
No, he didn't give a link.
Let's just put 19.
I'll get the chart back up.
Yeah, so Plymouth girl 10 diagnosed with coronavirus, and a British woman dies, age 21, same city. Look, all those spring breakers all going out and drinking beer out the butt cracks of your mates.
My God.
You've got a shot coming, right?
Man, I just after I saw that, and then you see like girls and guys licking toilets and doing this coronavirus challenge. I'm like, bro, fucking degenerates.
Yeah, and I was young and stupid once, but I don't think I ever went as far as licking toilets, right?
Yeah, I mean, well, you know, there's a time and place to, you know, have a safe, foolish time. But I don't think right now is it.
No, it's not, and especially when you're dealing with something so unknown, right? And we have to. So I'm just reading that. So she suffered from convulsions. So she's basically getting into a seizure state. Red blotchy skin is probably a sort of anaphylaxis, and she's got myalgia, right? Severe leg in the muscle, severe pain in the muscles. That's indicative of a massive assault on the central nervous system. It's probably some sort of encephalitis. Not encephalitis. I'm getting tired now. When the meninges swell up and
like brain swelling.
Yeah. What's the disease people get when they always move into dorms?
Mono.
No. It kills people. Yeah, mono's another one, right? And that attacks the nervous system, right?
Yeah, that did a number on me, man. I couldn't swallow for like 3 days until I went and got drugs.
Yeah, look, it wiped me out in my 20s. But why did it wipe me out? Because I was being stupid and burning the candle at both ends, studying, training, going out, partying, and so Wizardry's asking fibromyalgia. Yeah, so that's, you know, fibro is linked to the mononucleosis, but basically, you know, I would argue that pretty much any virus, any post-viral condition could sort of lead you into that state, especially if it's one that attacks the nervous system. So we know that Epstein-Barr does, and someone was asking me the other day whether influenza does, and I was under the impression that it didn't, but then someone told me that actually influenza is able to penetrate the blood-brain barrier. So let me just check that. I wanted to be
that's really interesting.
Influenza neurotropic. Some influenza strains are considered neurotropic, neurovirulent, having been shown to enter the central nervous system through several different means, such as infecting microvascular endothelial cells. So yeah, so these are all the same pathways as COVID can do. There's actually a Journal of Neuroscience article. This is 2018. So I mean, the fact that this is coming up in 2018, 2019, it's even if it's to do with influenza, it means it wasn't really understood before. Okay, yeah, meningitis. Rasta, thank you very much, sir. You're a gentleman. Let me just sort of email you that link. But the fact that these elements or these viruses can do that, it opens up a whole world of possibilities that we're only just beginning to see. And like I say, my point is being that it's going to induce behaviors that are what would be considered essentially antisocial on the sort of primal level, and that coupled with mass panic, which comes from soldiers being at the end of the street, and your idea of your identity being tied into this idea of liberal based individual rights, and you feel that they're going to start being trampled on by people that the people that want to move towards this one world agenda, then of course you're looking at a massive pressure cooker, right? And if people if the agent, like I'm predicting, can nudge people towards irritability, more prone to violence, like I say, I worry about what that would mean for the United States. So, and it doesn't take long for the government or the military to respond to its soldiers coming under fire, right?
Oh,
and
yeah,
so
they're not going to tolerate that at all.
No, not at all, right? But the thing is, there's literally millions and millions of people out there that could potentially be taking pot shots at them.
Oh yeah,
and
even just one person who's really well trained, or two, two people.
Yeah, and we know, and this was the thing where I just started to get that, like the war on terror was just like, it was being inflated to a degree that it was a sort of pretend, if you like. It wasn't real. It was being amped up. And one of the most devastating attacks that occurred was the Mumbai attack, where literally you had 4 people, you armed them with semi or automatic weapons, and they just converge on train stations and shopping malls, and they killed hundreds and hundreds and injured many more, right? And that's the easiest attack to do, but it didn't happen, right? So at that point I was like, where I'll say my views changed over time. I did have issues with respect to Muslims, and I'll sort of admit that, and I was wrong, right? In I took a sort.
That's really big of you to admit. Not many people can do that,
dude. I'm gonna pay for the glee that I took when
you were right.
No, I used to watch gun cam footage coming out of Iraq and Afghanistan, and for me it was like watching football, right?
Oh,
And
wow.
I'd be like, yeah, get some. And I actually, so I wanted to go. So in my family, my father, he was in the military, skilled position, and basically he said to both myself and my brother, he thought military was a good idea, but he said you've got to go in as officers, so you've got to get degrees first. And my brother wasn't that interested, and I sort of toyed with the idea once I got my degree, but then I preferred doing the science and sort of leading or taking that path. And we skipped what I was trying to get to.
You're just talking about the military and your military background and possible violence that's going to come up.
Yeah. So and sort of basically a mea culpa towards what we did in the Middle East, because Afghanistan, I was 100% behind after 9/11.
Oh,
I was
wow.
like, yeah, so
Rightfully
someone
so.
needs. And I had issues with Muslims growing up just because of the area that I lived in, right? And we can get into that another time. It's a sort of complex story as well, but that sort of tied into elements of vengeance that I felt after 9/11, where the war drums were beating. Over the years, I've realized that no, actually, there's some pretty solid people that are Muslim and everywhere, right? Whether they're Jewish, Muslim, right? I've met nice people over every spectrum, but I've also met assholes. And
So what was the turning point for you, do you think, in terms of getting over your prejudice and racism against Muslims?
Well, I wouldn't call it racism because Islam's not a race. I would say it was. Well, I started to see that they were generally right with respect to many things, and one of those was the invasion into school of the.
I think I know where you're going with this.
So as we've pandered to ever more diverse groups, we've surrendered more and more of the public space to people that I think should be excluded from being near children. That's a polite way of putting it.
I agree wholeheartedly.
And I'm very much against the idea that young children, primary age school children, should even be exposed to anything approximating what I would call I want to choose my words very carefully.
Drag queens?
Not just that, well, yeah, that sort of comes under it, but anything, so books that are saying, some trying to explain to kids why someone's got two daddies, that sort of thing. If that's coming into the school, that's got to stop, right? These people have to get away from our children, and I'm just, like I say, this is our words will be recorded, so I want to we're already sort of cutting close to the bone with respect to what would be considered polite conversation. But
have you ever been deplatformed, Kevin?
Well, I got my Twitter taken out straight away as soon as I started tweeting out that SARS attacks the central nervous system.
I couldn't find you.
Yeah, that got nuked straight away. But I tell you what, I got doxxed before it was cool, right? And I'm happy to say this story because it's right. It's a time of the real adults need to take control of the situation, and these people that use things like Twitter and stuff to sort of engage in what's called cancel culture right now and rage mobs. Let me tell you a story.
Please.
And it ties into how I the sort of feelings that I had towards Islam as a sort of culture. So I grew up in a sort of migrant background because my grandfather was captured by the British in the Second World War.
Wow. I would love to hear about that.
Yeah, North Africa, Tripoli.
Wow.
And so Italians and Polish made up this sort of like the ghetto part of the city, okay, where I was. And the only reason I was in this city, born or being raised in this city, was because my father was stationed at these at the Air Force bases around there.
And what city was this again, Kevin?
It's called Peterborough.
Peterborough in
the UK.
The UK.
So it's not far from Cambridge. So if you want to get a handle on why I have strong views towards the Islamic community, and if you can Google something, just Google the murder of Ross Parker, right? and then have a look what comes up. Did you get it? Okay.
I'm putting it on right now. Putting it up on the screen.
So of the 6 lads that killed this boy, which was 3 weeks after 9/11, one of them was my next door neighbor.
Wow.
And these were all Pakistani Muslims, and they literally beheaded this boy, as well as sort of smashed him to pieces with a hammer, and you didn't hear anything about this. And this was 3 weeks after 9/11. And
the boy was, the victim was white?
Yeah. Here's a little lad as well. Small young lad, 16 years old, just walking home from work. And literally it happened sort of 50 meters from it's my grandparents. I mean, it's my grandparents' next door neighbor, but
yeah,
just
I didn't know
trying to
anything about this. Oh yeah, he was a small guy.
So I had a lifetime of dealing with these people, growing up with these people, and it was a rough, tough neighborhood, and you had to learn how to handle yourself in that environment. And so that sort of colored my view to how these people were. And this that sort of played into, because if you look at the dates, it's 3 weeks after 9/11. As they were taken into court, if you find the proper transcripts, Wikipedia is really censored. They were shouting for Osama bin Laden, and yeah, they were real sort of
radicals.
Yeah, and so that, like I say, that's, if you wanted to understand part of the reason that I had those views, that's part of it. And your question is, well, when did you sort of start to sort of turn around to that? And that's where I saw that, okay, I might not agree with how they sort of conduct themselves, especially to people that aren't Muslim, but you know what? They maintain family structure in ways that we could learn from right now.
I agree.
And a brilliant example of that was so I want to say it was last year, right? But so they were trying to introduce these diversity books, right? The ones basically what I would call homosexual propaganda. They were trying to introduce it into primary schools in the UK. And the only people that put up any resistance to it was the Islamic community.
I read that, and then they withdrew their kids, right, from school.
Yeah, yeah, and good, right? Good on them. This is what should be happening, because we're sort of taking a sort of meta view of what's going on, and so that type of action puts a halt to the type of political maneuvering that allows for the eroding of the institutes that we're seeing, where diversity becomes the metric by which you hire and fire, right? So where suddenly people who are speaking out against certain things, so like what happened with Jordan Peterson and gender pronouns, okay, that being just a sort of one element of hundreds and hundreds of similar cases, right? But somehow he broke lucky with it happening at the right time, where people are just actually starting to say, well, hang on a minute, there's enough, right? The kids that the actual kids that are going to school, that are trying to get proper education, so usually those that are going into the STEM fields, they're sort of seeing the destruction being wreaked by the political activists that are coming through the university systems. So those that are coming from the humanities, and even now, the the STEM subjects are being assaulted by the same ideology with respect to like gender and diversity. And just to give you a germane example, yesterday in my inbox, the Royal Society contacted me and said, would you fill in our diversity questionnaire? Right. And in my mind, what the hell has a scientific institution got to do with trying to understand anything to do with diversity? Right. And I've seen it again and again. And I would come down heavily on the side of someone like Jordan Peterson, and I would try to stand in opposition to those that would use our freedoms that we've earned to try to erode the system. And it's, you know, Wizardry put in the comments earlier that they're trying to get into it's called the long march through the institutions. And so that you need to be familiar with someone called Antonio Gramsci. And he was basically a communist, but he made the argument that MSCI, yeah, there you go. He's the one that sort of formulated the idea that in order for the not the people, but the ideological drivers of communism, in order for them to succeed in the battlefield of ideas, was to weasel their way into institutions and then start instantiating things like hiring and firing based on based on trying to achieve these ideological aims. So you're not picking the best person for the job. So once Antonio Gramsci is in your humanities department, he's going to pick those that he thinks is the most ideal candidate to push forward that agenda. And that agenda,
and he won't tell anyone about that.
No. Well, only those that get inducted.
Oh,
right?
Yeah, only those who are part of the club, right?
Yeah, and that happens again and again and again. And if we want to bring it back to a current example, your Surgeon General, right? I want someone to prove to me that man is competent at some level and has the interests of the American people at heart, right?
Me too.
I'm not seeing it. And look, they've put themselves into a strategic position where they're going to say that they're trying to say we're going to get this under control in 2 weeks, right? That is so naively optimistic, of what's happening, that all that's going to do is just induce more chaos.
Yeah, it seems to me they're doing it maybe on purpose, waiting until things get as bad as possible, until people are begging for all their rights to be taken away. I don't know. I hope not. I hope it, but I don't know. What do you think?
Well, you can say that could be a product of the factors in play, right?
Okay, but not necessarily the reason.
Yeah, but what you're going to have is you're going to have different groups pushing and pulling to get their hands on it's usually the purse strings that they want, right? They want the money, and with the money comes the power. And the US as a country is like, the political discourse is just so bizarre to me that you seem unable to have a conversation like we're having, where we can say, oh, we identify that there's this problem. So, we can say that the politically correct commissars are sort of undermining our.
That's a great word for them.
Well, it's what they are, right? Yeah. They are the commissars in charge of their particular departments.
And for those that don't know, the political commissars were actually the workers who were basically in charge of swaths of soldiers during the Soviet Union. They're basically bureaucrats that have a lot of control, and they're basically clones for the higher ups.
Yeah, very well put. and that's what we're dealing with right now. I mean, they look a lot different because they're coming in rainbow colors, but the end game is the same.
Yeah.
Right. And
what is
I don't know what
would you say?
Well, I would say you probably what they would want is something along the lines of a global China, right?
Yeah, a communist one world state.
Yeah. And they'd probably not call it communist, but you know, it'd be something like I'm right next to my kettle, dude. So just
okay.
Just give me a second to.
Yeah, no problem. Let's do a quick break. Is that cool? I'm gonna refill mine too.
Yeah.
All right, we'll be right back, people.
Emmy, you wait. I need to get trash. I need your help just a second, please. It's late. We're gonna miss it. Can you move? Down here. Actually, what I need you to do is to keep an eye on that when the guy Addy comes. And just
tell him you're coming back.
Tell him I've had to run to get the garden done. He'll come. He just took a break as well. I don't know. There are some people listening.
Hello.
You're hiding.
Sorry, this is his wife.
Yeah, Addy. Dude, I've got to run to take the trash out. Otherwise, we're gonna miss it.
Definitely, no problem.
So you can speak to Addy.
How are you doing, Mrs. McCairn?
Where's the rest of it?
On the side there.
I'm gonna miss it.
Well done. Did you
they
mark-
were just
loading it in? Are you online?
yeah.
Did everyone just see you run out with
Yeah.
the garbage bags?
Yeah.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah, I do apologize.
I've been doing some reading on Twitter while you were doing that.
Okay.
These numbers right here are not actually accurate. The U.S. is now leading the world in number of cases.
Okay.
According to, I've got this off Twitter.
Worldometer, yeah. I use this one.
Yeah, and yeah, so then we're number one now, just like we are.
Ah, check his cat.
Yeah,
Can you see the cat? Can we see the cat?
Yeah, for sure.
A big Persian, I think.
This is Bubba. This is actually my my cousin's cat. Yeah.
Is it Persian cat?
I actually don't know. He's
Look at
from
that.
Wisconsin,
It's
but yeah,
gorgeous.
he is yeah, he's really regal, really
It's
fluffy.
a gorgeous cat.
Yeah, it's fluffy, right?
It's not very happy right now. It's like, let me go.
Yeah, let's have a look at Worldometer. I do think it's best. So, what I would do,
He just wants attention.
at least your cat does. We've just got one that just hides upstairs, just shits and eats, and we never see it.
Yeah, this is like the most extroverted cat I've ever met. He's awesome. He's like a pillow.
Hey, 1 second. So, people that are looking at that bunch of statistics there, the Worldometer, the way to the best way to interpret that set of statistics is the panel on the right. If you go up, so active cases, it's impossible to derive any what would be called like parametric statistics from that, because essentially the group is always changing because you're getting more and more cases into it, right? But what you can do, and so some people try to argue for something called the case fatality rate, where they take the total number of cases and divide it by the amount that have died. And that gives I would say that gives an artificially low number. It's skewed because you've got people that are just being diagnosed into your data set. The best way to do it is the complete cases. So from someone that's taken a diagnosis and gone through the whole medical process, through treatment, what have you, and they're either given the all clear or they die. And right now, if I'm looking at that, it's still standing at last Friday. It was 10% morbidity if you got diagnosed. Now it's 16%, right? That's enormous. Okay. I can't hear you, dude. Your mic must be off. Your mic's off.
Okay, there we go. Yeah, so 50% of the global population is over 1 billion people.
So, I didn't catch that. Say that again.
Oh, give me a sec. This guy's doing it. You can hear me now, Kev?
Yeah.
Okay, so, yeah, I checked yesterday, and 16% of, I think it's like 7.6 is over 1 billion.
Yeah. you're looking at a major, right? So that's just the illness. Once you get into those numbers, a whole bunch of other factors come into play, right? So you're beginning to see that emerge right now, which is the social consequences, right? So you may have 1 billion people going to die. Connected to those 1 billion people are industries, families, you name it, it's linked to it. And the secondary knock-on consequences are going to be severe. Okay. And everyone's sort of been saying to me, well, no, it's going to go down, it'll go down. And no, it doesn't. And everything about that particular statistic, it's literally turning into worst case scenario. And I'll tell you, there's a very, very clear reason why that will be, is because the medical infrastructure will become overwhelmed. Okay. And there's only so many ICU beds that are going to be able to intubate someone and give
life support. Really?
Yeah. And right now, I'll tell you this, the whole concept that there'll be a neural element to it, it's not going to get on their radar because they're just going to be swamped by the numbers that are just showing the pneumonia.
Yeah, there's no time to think really for the
right.
people on the front lines.
Yeah, look, as I was sort of figuring about what do I do in this situation, right? Because everyone wants to feel that they're trying to help somehow, and
I don't think so, but I hope you're right.
But I try to sort of look on the positive.
Yeah, that's a great way.
And so I thought, well, I could try and write a paper about what I think are my predictions for this virus, and it would have gone into a low impact.
Yeah.
Hypothetical.
To do it, I think this is the quickest way to get the message out because everybody's on their phones right now,
Yeah. And if I can reach, I would reach 100 people with a paper that might take the time to read it, and already I've reached thousands doing it.
Yeah, and another thing too is people don't like reading. Like, they much rather listen to it and watch it.
Yeah, and I understand that. Well, no, I read, but the thing is, I've generally, my reading now either consists of manuscripts or comments. Right, okay. I can't remember the last time I picked up a book, a novel.
Yeah, university maybe.
No, because even after I sort of left university, the internet wasn't really picking up steam yet. It was a niche thing. So I was reading books for a long time, but I would say within the last 10 years, you could sort of see the precipitous drop. But everything's digital, so I'm reading manuscripts in PDF, and you're sort of cataloging them as in your database of knowledge. And
sorry, give me a second.
No. Wizardry, do you have a link for those stats? No, it's not that I don't believe you.
Sorry about that. Bubba opened the door. He knows how to open the door sometimes. He always likes chilling right on my audio system I got here.
Yeah, you're getting plenty of shorts. I forgot where we were. So we're talking at statistics, and actually Wizardry has some interesting ones in the
okay, so he says the number of police that die, the number of people that die increased by 10. Are you scared of Corona, Wizardry? I had them a few days. Let's see if I can get them.
So those are interesting statistics about. So if you take 16% of the world population, well, no, it's not going to be that, because that would assume that you've got 100% infection.
Right. Okay. Which won't happen, but it's just I think a concept that is more easily grasped, I think, of the gravity.
Yeah, but I had long discussions with my brother yesterday about, he was like, you need to be careful when talking about the statistics,
Okay.
that that 16% figure doesn't apply to the whole population. It's just the infected. Okay.
Right.
And so we have to keep that in mind. But even if it was 500 million, right? And here's an interesting little fact. Cell phone subscriptions in China are down 21 million.
Why?
Right? Because 21 million people have gone missing, dude. they welded them into apartments, and there are pictures of Wuhan at night, and it's just dark.
Yeah.
Right.
It's apocalyptic, man.
Yeah. Look, and they're saying it's 80,000 people in their figures. Well, there's evidence to suggest otherwise, and
so Wizardry says we need 80% infection for herd immunity. Is that true?
Yeah. Yeah.
So 80%. So let's just run the numbers then, right? So 80% of it's about 7.8 billion, right? 7.6.
So you're looking about 6.4 billion.
6.4, and then so that's everybody infected, right? And then 6.4, so 16% of 6.4, right?
Yeah.
6 million. We need 2 billion, right? Oh, it's 64 million, 640 million, 6 billion. Okay, so that's still a billion, isn't it? 1,024,000. Or sorry,
240 million. Yeah, that sounds about right. And look,
that's for herd immunity. So you don't agree with herd immunity?
No, I actually look, in the long term, it's the best solution. Yeah. The way to do it, though, is to make sure that you're sort of inoculating yourself little by little and not getting a massive infective dose. And this is where we come circling back round again to these people that were just saying masks are not necessary. Okay. Yeah. And it's got to be one of the worst bits of public advice in history.
Oh,
right?
This guy, and like, he's going to be a household name, I predict. Don't you think?
Well, I hope he just disappears off the.
Yeah, I guess I meant a household name in the bad sense, infamous. But yeah, I agree 100% that yeah, it's so about the herd immunity though. So you only really need one microbe to essentially build up to inoculate yourself, right? You don't.
No.
Or how does that work? Because I'm very much an amateur, and I think people would like to know what that requires exactly.
So I'm not a virologist or epidemiologist. So there's a sub threshold. You have to get the immune system to trigger a response, and the immune system is basically a system-wide set of systems or functions that go from the bone marrow to the surface of your skin, right? So there's multiple levels that need to get triggered, and so you need you could say, well, one virus gets in, but then that virus has to be successful in the environment of your body, because your body has natural things, like the structure of stuff is designed to sort of kill things, and you've got hairs in your nose that sort of stop the bacteria sort of latching onto walls, and there's many things that one virus particle would have to get over to make a difference. But if you say, well, if you said like 1 billion viral particles from someone sort of sneezing in your face would overload your system.
If you like an atom bomb, essentially.
Yeah. Okay. And so, and I don't know, I guess in all reality it would depend on the agent, how infective and virulent it is, and I guess
it's hard to predict, impossible to predict, right?
Well, it's got to be, it's a precision science, because people do get vaccines. You know, I
Right.
have
But
to.
I guess
I
I
have.
meant at this point, right? At this point in our
Oh,
knowledge.
at this point, they're just guessing. And anyone,
Yeah.
so there was a study just come out as I was getting ready to sort of do a stream where I was just going to sort of look at the latest facts. Was that the first blinded study with chloroquine has failed, right? So everyone was putting faith in the quinine molecule as being something effective against this agent. And the first time they test it properly, which is what I was saying from the beginning, you can't just go with, oh, anecdotal reports of it working. You have to have double and triple blinded studies. Okay. And if you don't have that, anything else is just, you know, you're tossing a coin as to whether it works or not. Okay. You know, it could be that, you know, people getting the quinine type therapy, you know, they might just be getting that extra bit of care which pulls them through.
Yeah, just that little boost, maybe one little extra punch they get against the virus that'll just push it over and maybe help them, but it won't necessarily like.
Well, I was just thinking more in terms of like the general care, so like because they're under test, the doctors are paying attention to what's going on, so they feel like they're getting more care, and that placebo effect has a measurable. Yeah, it's you know, it's not yeah, it's a factor. And so I'm sort of reading some of the comments here, and the US is in trouble with Trump. He assures the world US economy will be back up and running in 10 weeks. That's nonsense.
That's complete fiction.
Yeah, and that's in the realm of them saying we'll know more in 48 hours, like they were saying a few weeks ago. As literally what they should have been doing was sealing off borders, shutting down airports, and basically tracing anyone that came through an airport, right? Yeah. Especially if
it's not like they don't have this ability, you know.
Oh, right. If they want to, they can literally track everyone in the country, right?
Yeah. They can
like
find anyone almost anywhere.
Yeah, and the fact that they haven't, and they've sort of let this thing creep up to them. Again, we just get into this: who's culpable and who's negligent. And okay, Surgeon General is one that we can take out, but there would be that all the people of the CDC. The Fauci guy, there's those two women, the Indian woman, the woman with the gray hair. I don't know those names. I would root every one of those people out, and they would be out on their asses. And I would, you know what I would be doing in a situation like this? I wouldn't want active military personnel, but I would want people that had served in high stress situations like that had medical knowledge and are prepared to sort of stand up in a sort of strategizing environment and make their voice heard. Because I absolutely
agree. Doesn't it seem to you like a lot of the big players in the political sphere are not saying anything? Like it doesn't seem like anybody is standing up, and like any really powerful players like are standing up and saying anything, which I think has contributed partly to my doing this. It just seems like everyone is scared and doesn't really know what to do.
Yeah, so it's me sort of putting my professional credentials on the line and calling these people out. I mean, I can do it because I'm not in that game anymore with respect to trying to get up that greasy ladder, and I can just I've been high enough to know how these people work, and I can see cowardice and incompetence when I see it. I know how these people fawn around people that they think are their superiors, and you know, they play the game of
just like the political court, right? Like the pull-up game.
Yeah. And you know, at the end of the day, what are they thinking? Well, they want to get their pension too. They want to get their kids through university, and it takes, you know, if you're going to put these things on the line, it's going to cost you, right? They'll pull your funding, and they'll do all these kind of things to you and that's a tough process to go through, where you're sort of losing things that you feel that you've built towards and your life revolves around. And look, I had to dismantle my lab after 10 years a couple of months ago. It's very, very hard to do because it's the only lab in the world that could do the things that I was doing, right? And it's sort of end of an era, but that ended and suddenly this has started. So okay, that doesn't surprise me. And another time we'll get into sort of like the metaphysical thing with it, you know. I think my battery's going to run out.
Yeah,
pretty
definitely.
soon.
Let's wrap up, Kevin. I really appreciate this. I hope anyone watching really got something from this. As I said, I will contact Sean and try to hook you up with him. And yeah, I'd love to chat again, man. I feel alone, to be honest here. Nobody's taking it seriously here, and I'm just gonna stay in quarantine. So I'm pretty much gonna be online most of the time that I'm awake, if not all the time, other than eating.
So you join up with us, and what we're doing is just aggregating information, trying to find out the people that are being negligent, and we build a network that way. And the best thing and what that does is that enables us. The more people you get into it, then the more people you're going to get that one are getting exposed to the condition itself, and we can potentially help those people.
Yeah.
And two, you're organizing on a level where well, like I say, you have to be careful about sort of hierarchies and the people that want to the powers that rats that want to always sort of try and destroy an organization or anything that's approaching opposition to them. And right now we will, as we aggregate more people and we speak more online, and we should choose our language carefully, and in doing so continue to call them out. And the more people that you get on board and the more it's spread around. The reason that people know Jordan Peterson is because people listened to the words he was saying, they made sense, and people passed it around. So we've got to be in that situation right now. We have something they don't, which is a bit of knowledge that they're lacking with respect to the disease progression. And there's determined people. Look, I read the comments in here. Wizardry's gone and got the numbers. China Mobile, 8 million lost. China Unicom lost 1.1 million, or nearly 1.2. China Telecom lost 6 million.
So these are all the cell phone subscribers that have mysteriously disappeared in China.
Yeah.
So total loss is 15.3 million mobile phones no longer connected.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Frightening.
Almost like magic.
Well,
let's wrap up, Kev. I really appreciate it. We'll put all Kevin's links in the description. And if you do get a Twitter back up and running, please let me know.
I do have a Twitter. I'll sort of send you information, and if we're sort of, if I'm trying to sort of get people to sort of assemble together enough so we can just start pinging stuff out. And like Wizardry got me interview with Sarah Westall yesterday. And so if people can reach out, and if they're in particular social circles and they're interested in this type of thing, so like the Sean Atwood guy you're talking about,
so I'm I guess transmitting the right information. How would I describe you as so your PhD is in what again?
Neuroscience. So I'm a systems neuroscientist. Basically, it's complex.
That works enough. I mean, if he knows you have some knowledge about this, he's definitely going to talk to you. And I don't think he's talked to anybody in Japan yet either, so that's going to be cool too.
Okay, so yeah, I would just tell him that I'm very familiar with BSL facilities. I'm familiar with neurotropic agents, and I can speak to the symptoms from at a professional level, I would say.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kev. Guys, I will again be putting all links in the description, and plugging this on all my socials. I think I would be definitely up for a convo again soon. What do you think, Kev?
Whenever, dude. I'm open to anyone just sort of like calling in, and because I think this is useful, right? The fact that we had a long form dialogue, we've addressed multiple issues. You know, we had a loose sort of topic with respect to trying to get message to the kids, and or not kids, but the younger generation. And I would just say this: those that are thinking of this as a nothing burger, think again, and just be cautious. It's just a month, right? Wait a month, just see how things look, right? And you know, and hopefully it all blows over and we're all just making a fuss about nothing. But if it's not, then we should be forming these networks and making sure we're as ready as possible. And if that means yeah, let's say because thing is, I'll just keep talking and
That's all good, Kevin. You're a machine, man. Yeah, let's try for tomorrow, but maybe we'll just go an hour or so instead of 4.
Yeah, but like I say, I think that the situation's changing so rapidly on the ground.
Oh yeah, definitely.
That I would just say everyone just needs to be talking to everyone, whether it's texting or speaking, or just get those bits of information out. And if it requires me to sort of tackle these people at a technical level with respect to their handling, then you know that can be my particular role in this. And I literally defer to people like yourself with respect to the modern technologies, with respect to social media and all that stuff, because literally I'm new to this. I've only really started using them the last couple of weeks, so
doing great so far, man. So that'll conclude it for the hopefully the longest episode of Addy Chats with Kevin W. McCairn Ph.D. in Neuroscience about COVID. We will be talking again soon, I assure you guys. Kevin, thank you so much. And
just final word to your audience as well. When Addy gives you my contact details, feel free to contact me, especially if you've got concerns. Okay, it's an open invitation to everyone. I don't know if you have the Discord, Addy.
Yeah, I can put that in the link too, for sure. Is that your preferred method of contact?
I tend to sort of check that a lot. Email or Discord is one of the best. I kind of keep an eye on the YouTube chat if I have it on, but Discord, if you really want to get in touch fast in the conversation. And I'll try and the thing is, I don't have a phone, so Twitter is like a sort of PC based experience for me, and it's just I just find it irritating, to tell the truth.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, I'll definitely include the Discord link.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kev. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, salute to you, sir, and yeah, speak to you soon.
Until next time.
Yeah, take care, buddy.